while you do the introduction, I might get some water and stuff.
Yep.
So I'll be like 2 minutes.
That's fine. We just hit live now. Take your time. You'll be introduced when you are here and ready to go. But guys,
Cool.
you may notice that we may already be live. So welcome everyone. This is the On Just Restart podcast. I am joined by a few different people this time. We're trying 4 again. We haven't done it in a very, very long time. But you know, I was just talking to everyone and ended up we got 4 people tonight, so here we are. So we're gonna make it work. Hopefully it's a good format for you guys. Let me know how everything is looking and sounding. I am sorry we started late, but hopefully you guys will forgive me. But anyway, this time around, Brandon, what about Nintendo? Oh, I'm sorry, Brandon. What about Nodnard?
How dare you?
The thing is, like, you had the name for years, and we've been doing the podcast for a while. And it's always been, what about Nintendo? What about Nintendo? Now
Honestly,
it's what about Nodnard?
I didn't even notice that
No,
you said
I did.
it wrong. You called yourself out, and I was like, oh yeah, screw you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But anyway, what about Nodnard's channel is linked in the description below. But you notice a few other people linked in the description below as well. For example, Shifty. Shifty is back. It's been a little while, but our good friend Shifty is here to talk Nintendo. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, and honestly, I always have time to talk about Nintendo, so I'm kind of just happy to be here again. So.
Yeah, man, I've missed you. How's life?
Life has been okay.
Okay,
but you know what?
Understandable.
Exactly. But you know, I still find the time to play games, and as long as I'm able to do that, I think I'll be good.
Yeah, for sure. It is the ultimate escape, right? I actually, so last night, I decided to download Resident Evil Village for, obviously, well, maybe it's not obvious. It was the first time for me to download Resident Evil Village, and I started playing it last night with a couple friends. There's something about horror games that I like playing it with other people. Maybe it's because I'm a coward.
You're scared.
I think that's part of it.
Scared little bee.
Perhaps a little, but it's just also there's something fun about kind of doing it with others, right? Like picking apart like the puzzles and examining it and sharing in the fear. And yes, also because I'm scared. But the game, I don't know. I was really enjoying the game. I heard it's only about 8 hours, so I do kind of want to beat it in like 3 or 4 sittings. But I got pretty deep into the castle area, so you know it's a pretty good game. Not on Switch, not yet. Maybe in the future, maybe on the Switch Pro. But yeah. But also, Don, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back.
Sweet. So Don's also here. Don is the owner of MonsterMaze. He's been on the channel a few times before. You guys may be familiar with him. He likes to talk Zelda and makes awesome videos. His channel is also linked in the description below. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, doing good. Thanks for having me once again, man.
Mm-hmm.
So 3rd time, I think.
Yeah,
at this
I
point.
think so. 3rd time's a charm.
Always fun, man. I enjoy watching your podcast, but it's even more fun to be on them.
Because when you're on them, we can engage in deep discussion. I'm excited because, like, I feel like on the podcast, well, yes, it's kind of like sort of just talking about the news that happened in the week. I feel like sometimes we come up with ideas, and those ideas sometimes make a lot of sense. So I'm always kind of excited because there's always that potential that we'll like all like kind of combine our brains and something magical sort of come up that may or may not materialize in the future. For example, on the podcast, I feel like I definitely got the idea, like it came out of the podcast. Like one day I was like, you know what? What if like the Mario Odyssey team were to make a Donkey Kong game? You know? And now it may not be exactly the Mario Odyssey team, but perhaps some team related to the Odyssey team is maybe working on a Donkey Kong game according to a whole bunch of different internal sources and insiders. I've even heard some things, so, you know, who knows what'll happen tonight, but I think it's gonna be a good time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome.
But on the note of tonight and the discussion we'll be having, as the title may be suggesting, we'll be talking about how Nintendo may be leading up to E3 2021. When will they announce the Direct, if there even will be one? There will be, probably. but also kind of like how this all sort of relates to the latest Zelda news we've been getting. We got some more information about Skyward Sword HD. Nintendo's been sort of like putting out different like tweets about the different characters. They launched this website that tells us about the history of Zelda a little bit more. They gave us news about the Zelda and Loftwing Amiibo, and there's some controversy around that, but I also feel like there's some interesting implications for maybe Breath of the Wild 2 as well. But then also we got confirmation of the bonus content and DLC packs 1 and 2 for the Age of Calamity DLC. And what's interesting about all of this was sort of teased by to us from a couple different insiders. The one in particular we'll be sort of talking about tonight is Samus Hunter, as we've been sort of talking about on the channel the last few weeks. And it's seeming like every time we get more and more news from Nintendo, be it Zelda or Monster Hunter or Pokemon, they become increasingly more and more correct on what they've been telling us. So, you know, they've been suggesting some things, and it all is sort of pointing towards Zelda news at E3, but like bigger Zelda news, like the sequel to Breath of the Wild. So that's sort of what we're going to be talking about today. Basically, a lot of Zelda. So, yeah, that is the plan. But, before we do that, let me kind of check in with the chat here. Just do a little bit of Q&A. We can all sort of jump in on our thoughts. If you guys see anything in the comments you guys want to bring up, by all means, put it out. One thing I'll point out is that lately my cat Onyx has taken up the habit of just jumping on my lap repeatedly, and I can't stop him. He's just going to continue doing it. So if that happens a few times, please excuse the distraction. All right, buddy, you're in the show now. You did
Part
it.
of the show now.
He's his fifth guest. What do you got to say? He's got nothing. But
Got a few words.
he talks, just not when I want him to. But anyway, let's check with the chat here. D.E. Fox, hello. Izzy Diaz, hello there. Perry of Hyrule, Sunny Shields, J Skies, hello to you all. New to the channel, J Skies, well, welcome. Ronnie Fazio, Nintendo Josh, hello. Seahawks. Rescue Squad Culp, hello. Leave my name out. Let's switch it up from the same points on Donkey Kong Breath of the Wild 2 and Metroid rumors. That those things will probably pop up at some point in this discussion. Let's see here. Jason Fulton, do you think we're playing Breath of the Wild 2 by June 2022? I feel like most people believe we'll be playing Breath of the Wild 2 by June 2022. Or at least it'll be released by then, so you have the opportunity to do so.
I would sure hope so.
Yeah. I'll tell you that if the game doesn't come out this year, I'm then not sure when it'll come out next year, just because we know Legends Arceus is due out for early 2022. Then to me, that screams like March 2022. So if Pokemon Legends Arceus is coming out March 2022 and Breath of the Wild 2 is not coming out this holiday, where do we see that game come out? So I'm not 100% sure, but I'll go ahead and take a bet and say that yes, most of us will be able to play Breath of the Wild 2 by June 2022. I hope. What do you guys think?
Well, on my end, I think that's sooner than I expect, but at the same time, I would not complain. As long as the game is polished and it comes out when I want it to, for the most part, I'm pretty much ready for the game to be out by now, honestly.
Okay.
But, yeah, I mean, whether or not it's coming summer, I don't know. I do think it's not going to come early 2022 for the same reason you just stated, because of Arceus. But if
My
it's not
prediction's
summer...
been this holiday, but people are suggesting maybe not.
Right. I mean, I can see why not, because it seems like we get one Zelda game per year, right? Like, because this year we already know we're getting Skyward Sword. I feel like that could be that game for the year where they just kind of, hold us over until Breath of the Wild 2 is ready.
Sure.
So I can see it being next year, 2022. I just don't know exactly when.
Right. Right. That's a possibility. I've thought that maybe because Skyward Sword seems a bit more of a minimalist remaster, right? And because it's coming out in July, that still does leave room for like a Breath of the Wild 2 November 35th anniversary celebratory release. Maybe, right? That's been my prediction. But Don, what are your thoughts on the whole release date debacle for our hopeful sequel?
I think right now it's very hard to say for sure, because it all depends on what we're going to see at E3. We don't know what the state of the game is, what state the game is in right now. Um, like we do have to keep in mind when they've been working on this game probably since early 2018 or something, like after the Champions Ballad released, and it's been a bumpy ride, especially due to COVID and stuff. But I don't believe that the setback was as immense as some people think it was. They were still able. Of course, every company has to adapt to the new situations, and I'm pretty sure it did suffer to some degree. But like, suppose we get like a full blowout for Breath of the Wild 2 at E3. We're going to see gameplay. They're going to do a treehouse demonstration. If it turns out the game is much further in development than we really think, then I would say 2021 is still very much possible. It is the 35th anniversary of Zelda this year. And of course, Skyward Sword I don't think Skyward Sword is going to make that much of an impact on whether or not the game will release. When it will release, rather.
Yeah.
So I'd say, depending on what we see, right now 2021 is still on the table for me. And I'm the guy who already said, like, pretty early on 2020 was not going to happen, back when we were still anticipating what was going to happen that year. So it's until we see what we will see at E3, which I'm pretty sure we will, it's still on the table for me. If not, then maybe 2022. Probably not early because of Arceus. Probably second quarter at least.
Yeah, maybe it could be like a May release or something like that. I think that's possible. Or June, maybe. Somewhere around there, I think, is conceivable for sure. I'm just trying to think
surprised.
Yeah, go on, Brandon.
I'd be very surprised if they do like show a lot at E3 and then it comes out like November 2022. Like, I can't see that happening. I feel like if it's come out like after the first half of next year, then we probably won't see that much at E3. Like a trailer, maybe some like small gameplay, but it's not gonna be like the blowout that I think a lot of people are hoping and wanting for. Which I think that's what I think is gonna happen. But if not, then I don't see them coming out and be like, "Here's everything about Breath of the Wild 2. You can play it in a year and a half."
Yeah. So the interesting thing, you asked a perfect question, because this question's like a whole huge topic here. I'll get to chat in a moment. We may have to take a break from this topic and come back to it, but there is a rumor that's been brought up by Game Over Jesse, who is another Zelda channel, and he's said, from what he's heard or something, that maybe we could see like a normalish Breath of the Wild sequel trailer during the direct, like a 3-minute or so for a trailer, like a general trailer to tell us a lot of things about the game, but that'll be kind of the extent. And then at the end, they will announce that there will be kind of like another event where they'll detail the game more so, along with other Zelda anniversary things. So it's an interesting concept, because from that rumor, if we assume it's true, you could interpret it a few different ways. You could interpret that as, we're going to have to wait a few more months for Breath of the Wild 2 news, or it could be kind of a thing where it's just a few weeks, maybe kind of like a Sakurai, how sometimes we get news of Sakurai Presents within a direct, right? But it's also possible that maybe Nintendo has more than one event planned for E3. Like, why can't Nintendo have more than one presentation at E3, right? Especially if they're just digital events. Like, I don't think that's out of the question. Maybe if Nintendo wants to have like a Zelda 35th anniversary focused presentation, they can do that after the E3 direct. Like, I think that's conceivable. And maybe we could still get Breath of the Wild 2 news within that sort of E3 time period, perhaps, right? Sometime in June. Hard to say, but either way, I am in agreement with you, Don, that if we are getting kind of like extensive gameplay and footage, like an actual blowout, as Brandon and I have both been hoping for a few months, then yeah, that would certainly suggest that holiday 2021 would be when the game is coming out. But also say that if we get that kind of information, they're going to tell us the release date at E3 is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, well, plus I think, like, I'm not necessarily saying that we're going to get like hours and hours of footage of Breath of the Wild 2 at E3, but I do think like they could also always like drip feed it afterwards, like in the months after E3, because I do think that once the cat is out of the bag, so to speak, like once we do finally get to see what this game is all about, they're gonna do it a little bit, just like as a comparison with Age of Calamity. You know, once that game was announced, they kept giving us new updates about the game so many times.
Right.
Like almost every week at some point we were getting new character reveals and new little gameplay. We had the Tokyo Game Show presentation afterwards. We had a separate direct where it was shown. So I do think that once it shows up, it's gonna snowball quite quickly.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. It actually kind of reminds me of what we're seeing now for Skyward Sword. We've been getting a lot of Skyward Sword news throughout the week. But I guess I can see how far we could go into this topic. So I'm gonna put a pin on it for now. Just to go back to the specific question, I think most of us think that there's a good chance we'll play Breath of the Wild 2 by June 2022. But we'll come back to this because it's like the big questions on every like Zelda fan's mind. When's Breath of the Wild 2 coming out? When are we getting news? So we'll be circling back to this. But let me continue on with the chat here. Let's see here. Tayrol, Zelda, Metroid, and Donkey Kong are three of Nintendo's biggest franchises, all with significant anniversaries this year, so it's not surprising that many of the rumors floating around are centered around them. Yeah, I'm personally expecting to hear about all three franchises to some degree at E3, for various reasons. You can take from that what you will, but definitely I think there's a really good chance we'll see them, for sure. I don't know if we'll have like anniversary directs though, just to be clear about each franchises, but I do think we'll see something from each franchise at E3 this year. Hopefully. Let's see here. Moving on. Yeah, if you guys at me, it's more easier for me to kind of find your question. Hello there, Birdman. Let's see here. All right, I got a few ats. Okay, Zach Korinsky, do you think Monolith Soft's new IP is open world? At least about as open as everything else we've seen from Monolith Soft. I feel like that's a decent bet. I'd be surprised if it doesn't have wide open areas. I mean, you look at what Monolith Soft has, they work on the Zelda, they work on Breath of the Wild. They helped out with the entire environment, right? And Breath of the Wild is a pretty big open game. That's kind of like their expertise, I would say. So I'd be surprised if we see something from Monolith Soft and it's like not open. That doesn't mean fully open world though, right? It can be like open areas that are sort of segmented, kind of like Xenoblade Chronicles 2. But yeah, I expect wide open areas in whatever they're making. I'd be surprised otherwise.
Yeah, I don't really see Monolith doing a linear game in any way.
Mhm.
They typically excel at doing like the massive open regions kind of gameplay structure.
Yeah.
So
But I guess the question is, would they go for like the Xenoblade and Xenoblade 2 style, or like the Xenoblade X style, where it is just one huge open world?
Right. Because, yeah, I guess that makes sense, because there's a lot of ways you can really do open world, right? Like, there's not,
Yeah.
it's not just the way they know, I guess. I think it'd be cool if they go back to the Xenoblade X way, just see them try to, like, take that concept and kind of run with it further than they already have. Because as of right now, they kind of only really did it for X, and then when you play Xenoblade 2, it goes back to the way that the first Xenoblade did. So they could do that. I would like to see them do that, but if it's a new IP, technically anything's on the table.
Yeah,
True.
for sure.
Xenoblade 2 also had like a very short development time, so that might have been one of the reasons why they had more of the segmented design. Whereas X took like a lot longer, and they've already had like a year more development time over what they had on 2. So maybe they've had more time to make a more open world if that's what they decide they want to do.
I definitely don't see them doing like a Dark Souls-esque type of game. Like the whole reason they were brought on board for Breath of the Wild is because they're such like experts, so to say, on the open world and like big environments and stuff.
Yeah.
And that little concept art that we saw, it looked a little bit more serious. I don't think it's going to be Xenoblade 2 style.
It's interesting because you mentioned Dark Souls, like, because it has kind of almost like a Dark Souls vibe to it, but definitely if they were to make the actual like gameplay wise, it would absolutely be more open, for sure.
Yeah. I'd say maybe a little bit of a Monster Hunter type of vibe, but of course not the same. But you know, in terms of art style.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see something like that. I do like, Shifty, how you were referencing Xenoblade X, because I've had similar ideas that the next new IP from Monolith Soft could sort of evolve a little bit from Xenoblade X. And I'm not referring to Xenoblade X2, by the way, which I do want to see someday, because I feel like there's definitely some things left off with that story. But what I'm sort of thinking about here is kind of like some gameplay elements they sort of played around with Xenoblade X. Like they had like a pseudo sort of online sort of interactivity you could play with others, right? And they had like some online modes. Like I feel like it was a very stripped down, basic, not MMO sort of feeling, if that makes sense. Like I guess the point I'm getting at here is that I would love to see Nintendo and Monolith Soft maybe go towards more of an MMO like style. Maybe not exactly MMO, but maybe closer to that, right? If you consider that Nintendo has recently revamped their online servers and Monster Hunter Rise runs like a beauty, and they're pushing the Super Mario Party as well. Like, I do wonder if Nintendo has a couple like relatively major online sector games that they have around the corner. Conceivably, it could be one from Monolith Soft, because I think the one they were talking about, the new IP, like they were hiring all the way back in 2017, right? So considering that we're in 2021, you would think that we should be close to an announcement or like a reveal of what that is. So conceivably, it could be like an online-centric sort of RPG, which I think could be really, really cool to see.
I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Xenoblade X at one point development planned to have some kind of multiplayer?
It feels like it was.
Yeah, I
like
mean,
they
it
have
had
that
multiplayer. It
guild
was just
system,
yeah.
And the crappy multiplayer that barely functioned.
Like, from what I remember, you could be on teams that to accomplish tasks, right? But no one be actually in your world. But you could also do a separate thing where you could join like a team of 4 and fight like a big boss. But I think ideally, maybe it would be a situation where a few people can jump into a massive open world with you, and you could team up as sort of like an RPG experience, or like a pseudo MMO RPG experience. That'd be awesome to see.
Yeah, that's what I want to see.
I'd be very curious to know how exactly they go about it, because there's a lot of different ways you can go about a game like that. You know,
yeah,
like you can go the Destiny route, or you can go the Borderlands route. You can go the Dark Souls route. Like, there's a lot of different ways you can kind of do something like that. I'm hoping that if they were to go and tackle this sort of game, I would kind of prefer if they take something that's very relaxed in terms of like people joining in. Like, I don't want something like Destiny or The Division where it's kind of, very heavily loot based, and you kind of have to, be on top of the game like every day for you to really like compete and like, be in it.
If a game feels like a chore for me, I'll probably stop playing it.
Right, like you don't want that. You want the game to still be fun and be able to progress with your friends. So even though like Borderlands isn't the best example, it's kind of like what I'm thinking of in a way, where it's you have a 4-player co-op game, you're leveling up, you're gaining skills together, you're going through the story together, but it's not, so dependent on the skill of your loot or whatever.
That's what I would like. I would like it to just be like a single-player game that I can play with my friends.
Right.
Like, I don't know, Halo, I guess. It's like I could play campaign by myself, or I could have my friends play with me.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a few different ways they could do it. At the very least, I would love to be able to like do like a co-op thing where you join up with another team of 3, or of 3 other people, so form a team of 4, and you just explore a massive open world together. Like, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like, that's exactly what I want from it. I just want to be able to play the game from start to finish with friends of mine.
So imagine, so for all the Xenoblade games, you usually have a team of 3 to 5 people, right? Or characters. Like, imagine if those characters were all playable by your different friends. And there it is. It's a Xenoblade game, but you can, through online co-op, you can explore the world together. Each member is an actual playable member of the party.
Well, in a way, like Xenoblade 2 already felt like it should have almost had multiplayer in it. Like the blades, they're almost like Pokemon, you can exchange them with each other and or take control of them like during a fight.
Yeah, that is actually an interesting point, because like they could maybe evolve that idea to make it more of something that you do come back to, and you can trade different blades and things of that nature for sure. And what's interesting about it is because it is like 2 different characters in one, right? Like maybe they sort of evolve off that idea as well. So like you have a new MMO like experience. It's a whole party, but each party member has like their own character that they control that's beyond just their main avatar, and maybe there is a lot of customization options and even trading options there, which would encourage a lot of sort of online gameplay.
It would make the blade system a lot nicer, because I kind of just found it annoying as a single player experience.
There were so many of them.
Yeah,
so many.
It was too much for me. I got a few good ones. I was like, all right, this is it. I got my crew. Because for most Xenoblade games, actually, like the first half of the game, I'm sort of exploring the different characters, and then by the second half, I'm like, all right, this is my crew. I already got a good strategy. I'm just rolling to the end with this, and that's pretty much how it is for every Xenoblade game I play, at least. But I just want to point out, we don't know if this new IP is going to be like an online MMO. We're just kind of speculating here, right? But we'll see what it actually ends up being. It'll be really cool to see. At the very least, to answer your question, Zach, probably going to be open-ish.
Hopefully we might see something at E3, maybe.
There's a good chance. ASAP Royal, hello there. Let's see here. Ronnie Fazio, do you ever just boot up a game and just do something as simple as go through the world to clear your mind? I did that with Spider-Man 2 on the GameCube a lot. I love going back to both Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey. I legitimately just enjoy exploring those worlds and platforming through those worlds without any particular objective. It's just fun to move through the environments in those games. Nintendo designed them in a way where you can kind of do a lot with the environment. It's just purely fun to explore. So yeah, sometimes I just do that, and it is quite a stress reliever.
I think the closest thing I have to that is Minecraft.
Makes sense.
Yeah, Minecraft.
Yeah, it's something about the music just hits right where it needs to.
Music in Minecraft is pretty awesome. It's so chill.
Right.
Well, it's also, there's just no urgency to that game. You can just mess around if you want, you know.
Yeah.
There's nobody that needs to be saved from a prince, like a princess being saved from a bad guy or something like that. You can just chill, build a huge base.
Right. I used to spend time just making sprite art of or pixel art rather of like different Pokemon and just make them on Minecraft while I'm just listening to all the music and just play that way.
Yep.
Yeah, Minecraft is pretty peaceful. I'm scared to get into it. I feel like I'll spend too many hours on it. Let's see. Oh, my chat jumped. I missed a comment here. All right, there's a lot, so I'm not gonna be able to get to everything. I apologize, guys. Thomas Owen, off topic, but just going to go on a limb and guess your favorite colors are red and black. If so, you have good taste, sir. Those are my favorite as well. Not a bad guess. Red is absolutely my favorite color. I don't know if I would say black is actually my favorite color. I'll tell you that, like, whenever I go on camera, I tend to wear darker colors, mostly because of the camera itself. Like if I were to wear like a bright like lime or neon shirt or like white, it would the lighting would just, it wouldn't receive it. It would be a very different sort of look. So I intentionally wear darker colors on camera, but I also in general do wear darker colors. But red is my favorite color. Yeah.
Because of the panels in the background of your room.
That they are red and black. That is true. Red and black are the colors for the channel though. There is a theming to channel: red, black, and white.
Well, red just goes very well with darker colors. Like
True.
red stands out too much. Red is one of those colors that just doesn't really mix that well with other brighter colors. It just starts getting too much.
Yeah, it's a pop out color.
Yeah.
Yep. Talbaron, when do you guys think Wind Waker and Twilight Princess are coming? So, I believe Wind Waker HD and Twilight Princess HD are real, and they're just Nintendo's waiting to announce them, and I think the release timing is going to entirely sway on whether Breath of the Wild 2 is ready for the holiday. If it's not ready for the holiday, we may see those games this year. If it's ready for the holiday, then we're going to see those games sometime in the first half of 2022. That's my opinion on that.
Let's be fair, they should have already been on the Switch, to be honest.
Yes.
They could
What are they
put it at
waiting
any
for?
point.
They would have to do almost pretty much nothing to get them to run on the Switch. Like Like at least the originals, they had to overhaul a lot of it and they had to add new functionality. But I mean, the Switch has NFC, so you know all the Amiibo functionality can just be easily be ported over.
Yeah.
As well.
The biggest challenge probably would be Twilight Princess with the IR cursor. Like either A, they can map that to the right, because there's two different motion controllers, right? The left stick could still be used for the waggle, and then the right side could be used for the cursor. That's a possibility. I'm actually trying to remember, how do they handle Twilight Princess HD on the Wii U? They just use a gyro sensor for the aiming, right? And maybe they just did they map the attack button just to a button? Yeah, they probably did that.
They just did the GameCube controls.
Okay, yes, they did the GameCube controls and use motion.
I don't even know if
for
the Wii
aiming.
controls are in there.
Oh
No, I don't think so. No,
I think
that
they
makes
just
sense
scrapped
actually.
that.
Yeah.
it does have the mirrored option if you play in hero mode,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
that's pretty much it.
The
Okay.
default though is the GameCube original, which is what I played. So
Yeah, same here.
Oh, okay.
So it was close to home for me.
So
But the
then,
button layout, the button layout of the Switch Pro Controller and the Wii U Pro Controller is pretty much the same. So I really don't see much trouble in porting those games over. Like the
No, yeah,
only
you're right.
thing they might, like the only thing I can see they might want to get rid of and replace it with something else is the stamps in Twilight Princess HD, because that was tied to Miiverse, which no longer exists.
weren't the bottles in Wind Waker also tied to Miiverse?
yes.
They probably just changed that to just not be tied to Miiverse.
They could just get rid of them.
They could just get rid
Yeah,
of
I
them.
did
Nobody-
like.
don't think
I thought they
anybody
were
would care.
cool, but you know,
I literally never interacted with them.
I wouldn't mind if they were to like reintegrate that and have it be like for Twitter posts instead. That'd be really neat.
Oh,
I don't know if
that'd
they
be cool.
they don't have to do that, but imagine someone tweets something out and you just see a Tingle bottle and you're like, oh, there's a tweet here. It would be interesting to see them do that, because Miiverse is basically just like Nintendo's Twitter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we'll see what they do. I think they could just like cut them out, but they might repurpose them in some way.
The only
Yeah, I
thing
mean-
I would like them to actually add would be 60 FPS, like we got in Skyward Sword.
That would actually
But
be
I think it
pretty
depends
huge, I
on
think.
how the game is coded. Sometimes
Yeah.
they just don't feel like changing the code to make it work with 60. It's not like it wouldn't be doable. It's just if they would want to do it. I imagine Skyward Sword, they wanted either it already worked pretty well, or they wanted to do it to help the motion controls feel better, which isn't really required in Wind Waker or Twilight Princess.
Yeah.
So I
And
would still love to see it though.
Another thing to know
Oh,
is that
sure.
the 60 FPS might have been one of the things that they did to sort of help to make the $60 price tag make sense. If we're going to get Twilight Princess and Wind Waker as a bundle, conceivably, then that's less reason to make it 60 frames per second, because at that point, from like a value proposition, Nintendo may feel like that's all they really need to do. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Yeah.
So we'll
Although
see,
I-
but I would definitely love to see it. I'm not gonna say no to 60 frames per second.
I mean, yeah.
like the Wind Waker already kind of feels like 60 FPS for some reason. It's not. It's capped at 30, but there is something about that game. It just feels so smooth for some reason.
It has very good animation work, I think.
Yeah.
Everything feels so animated and nice.
Yeah, there's
And
a
the-
certain flow to it.
Yeah, the frame rate is also just very stable in general. You have very little slowdowns. It's a
In
very
Wind Waker,
optimized game.
They have like these moments when you attack something where it feels like the game intentionally slows down.
It does. It has like.
I thought that was intentional.
Yeah,
I think
it feels
it's
like
a bit
it looks
like in
intentional.
It's like a bit like in Smash, you know, when you hit someone, you have that freeze frame where
Yeah.
everything just stops for like a second.
Yeah, exactly. It's very similar to that. I've always really enjoyed that, and that is them slowing down the game, not speeding it up. So it's just kind of neat.
Yeah.
I'll be fine if they don't do it. It won't really bother me. But if it's added, I'll certainly appreciate it.
Yeah. I'm not expecting them to put any extra effort into it. It's already a port of a port.
Yeah.
It's a kind of, or a port of a remaster.
Good
What
point.
if they just kind of mirrored the thing they ended up doing with Mario, where they just kind of put it on the Switch, but with little to no. Like, they won't put Twilight Princess by itself, they won't put Wind Waker by itself, but they put it together with no enhancements whatsoever.
Zelda All-Stars, but it's just 2 of them.
Yeah, like at that point, they might not feel like they really need to do anything like that because they already kind of the $60 value is essentially getting the 2 games.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure.
But they do have to do something about the stamps and the Miiverse posts though. Yeah, I mean, personally speaking, I can do without them because there's many moments where I was playing Twilight Princess HD where I was excited to get a chest after finally solving some puzzle or something, and it just turns out to be a stamp, and I'm just a little disappointed because I just never used Miiverse. So the disappointment would be gone if that happens.
They can just replace it with other treasures or something. Like originally, those chests held something else. So if they were,
you get more rupees you don't need.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you mean? You need money for the
for the magic armor.
Yeah,
you need
exactly.
money about 3 times in the game. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I really like Twilight Princess because there were a lot of like hidden like tombs is probably the wrong word, but a lot of hidden caverns and caves that you were
just random.
What is this place? What am I gonna find at the end of this cave? You know, that was pretty cool. I feel like that was a little bit of a precursor to kind of like shrines a little bit. Which does make me kind of wonder how Nintendo's going to handle Breath of the Wild 2. Like, I feel like they should not go... They should definitely bring back, like, the classic-style dungeons, like, get a few of those in there. But also, they should have, like, a lot of those mini-style dungeon challenges littered throughout the map. It's going to be really interesting to see how they handle that, because I'm assuming shrines are gone.
I would like to see some, like, more integrating to the actual world puzzles, you know? Like, in Twilight Princess, you don't, like, load into an underground, like, separate place. You just kind of like go into the cave, you know. It's like in part of the world.
Maybe there's to be a lot more like cave entrances. Like maybe it's gonna be something as simple as like maybe the Zonai, right, are the replacement for the Sheikah in this game. So instead of like a whole bunch of Sheikah trials, it's a whole bunch of Zonai trials, and instead of it being like shrines that come out of the ground, it's like little entrances that go into the ground, because we see like that massive earthquake and there is like this exploration underground, right? There's like a motif of that. So maybe a lot of it is just about finding like hidden chambers and tombs, to your point, Brandon, that go underground, and a lot of them are Zonai trials, just to see if you're truly worthy of being the holder of the Triforce of Courage, which I theorize will be returning in the sequel, since all 3 members of the Triforce will actually play a role in this game, it seems like. But we'll touch on that in a little bit. I want to get through the chat here because technically we're doing Q&A, and then we'll tackle it. Let's see here. Yeah, I'm gonna do a quick run through, and then we'll actually jump into the actual topics. DE Fox, unconvinced Wind Waker and Twilight Princess are coming to Switch this year, and Breath of the Wild 2 is coming in 2022. That may be the case. We shall see. I think we'll have a pretty good idea by E3. And 10 Josh, what would you think a Metroid Prime 4 multiplayer could look like? That's tough because I don't know how Metroid Prime 4 itself is going to look like. I'll tell you that I feel like Prime 4 has to be a little bit faster paced than previous Metroid Prime games. I think the scan visor kind of needs to return, but I feel like they might integrate it a little bit more with the combat visor to kind of speed up gameplay a little bit. It's my personal idea on that. And with the sped up gameplay and all of that, I feel like that would change how you play the game. But I gotta tell you, while I have theorized about multiplayer in Prime 4 beforehand, they did restart development. Their direction is probably different now. It wouldn't shock me if there's no multiplayer in Metroid Prime, because at the end of the day, Metroid Prime is not Halo. It's I feel like the best way to sort of describe Metroid, if you have not Metroid Prime, if you haven't played it before, it's kind of Jesus, cat, you just slash. This is why you can't sit on my lap for more than 5 minutes. He's gonna jump on again. Anyway. So
Andres, you basically want Metroid Prime with Doom gameplay.
No,
like
that's
the
not...
speed of Doom.
For the record, I'd love that, but not for Metroid.
Yes.
Well,
I mean,
this,
they could at least,
it,
they could at least incorporate some stuff from it, like the dash and stuff. I really like that in Doom.
I love Doom Eternal. How much just platforming there is. You just go and you're just launching across the map, constantly moving. It's great.
Right. I mean, on my end, Doom Eternal's probably up there with my favorite shooter of all time. But I just don't like some of the things I can take, like the dash, like you mentioned. Like I think the dash would work well in Metroid because it really kind of just sounds like the kind of upgrade that Samus would find anyways.
I mean, they gave her a melee attack in Samus Returns. Like I feel like in general that's the direction they're heading with Metroid. Like give her a little bit more fluidity with her movement and combat.
Yeah, I mean I think that sounds good to make her feel more involved with the combat, like make you feel more involved with the combat. And while Doom, I love Doom, it is mostly just combat, and I don't want Metroid to just turn into mostly just combat. You know, like, it is more than just combat.
So the point I was trying to make, because Don, I'm not. You suggested that maybe I'm alluding to maybe being more Doom-like. To an extent, yes, but to an extent, no. Because I feel like, they got to speed things up a little bit, but also like what I was gonna say before my cat rudely clawed my thigh, is that the game. Like, if I were to describe Metroid Prime to someone who doesn't know what Metroid Prime is, I would probably, like, in the most simplest way possible, say that it's like Space Zelda in first-person perspective with shooting. Like, so with that sort of thinking in mind, right? Like, if you think of Metroid Prime as more of an adventure game, right, with a lot of puzzles and stuff that you shoot instead of killing things with a sword, then that perspective is different, right? Because we don't have the same expectation for Zelda where we expect multiplayer in Zelda, right? Like, I feel like that's a direction that they may be taking Metroid Prime 4, and I'll be all for that because I think that would perhaps build an incredible single player. But at the same time, I'll also concede that if they want Metroid Prime 4 to sell, they might consider multiplayer because online multiplayer does definitely bode well for that. It could help the game it would help to sort of advertise the game itself a little bit more. And if they were to sort of speed things up a little bit, that might bode well a little bit better for multiplayer. But it really comes down to what direction they sort of take. So I'm not going to say hard no multiplayer for Metroid Prime 4. I'm going to say 50-50.
Yeah.
I mean, I would like there to be multiplayer, but not at the detriment of the single player. Like, I want them to just focus on the single player.
Like, maybe they could have a separate team that just does multiplayer.
Yeah, like if they did something like that, then it'd be a lot better. Also, go ahead, Brandon.
I would like because the question was like, what would the multiplayer be like, right?
Right.
So to answer that part of the question, I would like it to be kind of like, I guess, like classic Halo, but with obviously like less modes, because I think it should be like a smaller experience. Just like maps that are based on the levels you actually go through the game. You run through, you just fight each other, you find different guns and pickups. Like, I guess it would be just different. Instead of just having like a full loadout, like equipment, you would go and pick up a different type of blaster or whatever. I forget the names for everything in the game because it's been a while. But like, just go pick up power-ups and pick up different things, just like you do in Halo. Just like a small little just one mode. Like, not like Halo where it has just a ton of modes, but just like the classic like Slayer Halo 2 experience, but translated over to Metroid Prime. And if you haven't played Halo, you probably don't know what that means. But for all you Halo fans out there, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I mean, if they did have multiplayer, it would be easy for them to add DLC because they're like, oh, let's just add a new mode. Oh, let's just add a few new maps. And people would be all for that, right? Yeah, I mean, I do like your idea. Like, don't overcomplicate it. Just add a few very simple but fun, clear to understand modes, and you have it there, and it's very replayable and it's very fun.
Yeah, it sounds good to me.
Yeah.
I'm buying for the single player, but if there's good multiplayer, it'll keep me around a little bit longer.
Well, there was a time when multiplayer kind of came as an afterthought in a lot of cases. Like, back in the day with GoldenEye and stuff, they were like, oh, we'll just slap that on like last minute. And there was a time when that felt like almost for every game, where there was like a separate team, like last minute just being like, all right, we'll just add a little, and then you started having games like Time Splitters and stuff, where the multiplayer was actually a big part of it. Yeah, you had a complete one player campaign too, but the multiplayer was so extensive, it was almost like 50% of the game. which I just don't see something like that happening for Metroid. Like Metroid will always be a first-person experience, and they might throw in a little extra for you, like Brandon said, like one mode or maybe two.
Yeah. What would be interesting though is that maybe they bring back the Hunters games as well, right? Like what if like they bring back Metroid Prime and it does well, and then a year or two later they're like, okay, here's Metroid Prime Hunters, and they make it basically like there's different Metroid series, right? You have the Metroid Prime series, which is first-person adventure. You have the Hunter series, which is like a sci-fi shooter multiplayer game, right? And then you have just Metroid, which is the side-scrolling games. Like conceivably, you could have 3 different types of Metroid-style franchises that could all be like in loop, like one every 2 years.
Oh sure, yeah.
That could work.
Yeah. What if it was more of a co-op experience kind of thing? Because you remember they attempted
Like Federation
something like that with
Force.
Federation? Yeah, like they attempted something like that with Federation Force. Maybe instead of the way that game looked and the way it was, they kind of model it after how Metroid Prime 4 is. Maybe just 2 players, maybe whatever they can get away with, I guess. And it's like a side story where it's kind of happening alongside Samus's story in the game.
Yeah.
So I think several other games have done something like that, but I think what comes to mind is like Portal 2 did something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think Devil May Cry had a thing where like the other campaigns was happening around the same time as others.
Sure.
Same thing with Resident Evil. A lot of other
Yeah.
franchises have done something like that. So
Yeah.
maybe instead of like a competitive multiplayer, we're thinking maybe more cooperative. And
That's totally an
Yeah,
option. It'd be really interesting, right? Because like I mean, with Metroid Prime, you can give like, for example, you could have like giant, like crazy monsters, and you could create like puzzles based on like just working as a team to beat like giant monsters, right? Or fulfilling certain objectives. Like imagine, like think back to Echoes, where there was an actual like team of Federation troopers that went to I forget the name of the planet, but the planet that became 2 in Echoes, and they got completely ran down by the Ying. So, but imagine being placed under that sort of scenario where you're like, oh man, we are getting just ransacked by a whole bunch of Ying, and it becomes almost like a horde mode kind of situation, right? But it's a co-op or multiplayer sort of like defense, which would be really interesting to see.
right, they could even introduce if they end up doing something like that, since we don't know anything about the actual game. They could introduce like certain characters. Maybe it's from the Federation. Maybe it's other hunters that are mentioned that they're doing something somewhere else, maybe off planet or maybe somewhere else on the same planet, and that could be the story that the co-op takes place in.
Be cool. Have like kind of like a Halo Reach style story where you kind of just are that in the end you're not gonna win, but they make it work anyways.
Yeah, they could do something like they could take that story in any direction, because we pretty much know nothing about the actual story other than like teases from like previous games and whatnot. But they can pretty much do whatever they wanted, and if they end up doing that, I think it'd be kind of cool, especially if you can see them in the distance or in certain levels, maybe way in the background you see like these soldiers or hunters doing something.
Yeah, there's quite a few different ways they could go about doing like multiplayer for Metroid games. But we'll see what happens. Sonic Academy. Is it likely that we have Ocarina of Time Majora's Mask HD? Game Over Jesse said it could happen, but I'm expecting it to happen. What are your thoughts? I don't know. There was that Ocarina of Time trademark. I'm not like entirely convinced. I need more sources, I guess, to like come out and say that before I'm like, yeah, this is happening. It's not to say that I don't trust where it's coming from, but I need a little bit more information before I'm convinced of anything, really. Like, there's a lot of stuff. Like with the Donkey Kong thing, it just kind of there were a few different insiders months ago that said it would happen, right? And then you thought about the circumstances, and it made sense with the plans for the Donkey Kong Park and the 40th anniversary. So it sort of lined up, right? It was a rumor from a few places that I trusted that made sense. But then later on, right, more people kind of came out, more sources came out. And then I personally heard things as well. And we were starting to see like maybe subtle signs of something like that. For example, like the Diddy Kong render. So because of like the mounting evidence, then I'm like, all right, I think something Donkey Kong is like for sure happening, right? In reference to Ocarina of Time HD though, we're not at that level of supporting evidence. So I'm not convinced it's happening necessarily, but I'll tell you that if Nintendo's doing anything similar to what they did for Mario last year, they're gonna put out multiple Zelda games. And I do think there's a good chance that we see more legacy games come out this year, and it wouldn't surprise me if Ocarina of Time and or Majora's Mask are a part of them.
Go ahead, Brendan.
I was just gonna say I don't expect that to happen this year, if anything, because I feel like if we're gonna get more Zelda than Skyward Sword, or if we're gonna see Breath of the Wild or not, they would probably just be Wind Waker HD and Twilight Princess HD, because that's a lot less work.
Yeah. I'm just thinking like a 3D All-Stars like release for Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask. I'm not talking about like anything major.
No, they would probably just port over the 3D versions of the game, because Majora's Mask 3D wasn't even that long ago, so I doubt they will completely rework the game again. They will just upscale it to like when you can actually see what the game looks like when you run it in Citra if you dump the game.
Yeah,
and it already looks fine. Like that could work for a Switch port. It's just that I think it might be a bit too much. If we already have maybe potentially Breath of the Wild 2 releasing like soon, maybe this year, maybe at the start of the next year, and then Twilight Princess HD and Wind Waker HD and Skyward Sword HD. I don't know if they would also throw in Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, like why do all 3D Zelda? There's a few different 2D Zeldas they could maybe get on the Switch as well. Like we don't have Oracle of Ages or Seasons. Like it'd be nice to maybe see that come to Switch. And granted,
I feel like that's going to get remade eventually.
Maybe.
Like Link's Awakening.
There is that to consider as well. Like I feel like we're probably going to get another 2D Zelda before the Switch is done. It might be another remake. Maybe they just make a brand new 2D Zelda. But I guess the point I want to get at is that Nintendo does apparently want to have at least one sort of Zelda product per year. So if they just give us everything now, what are they going to do in the future? Like they could work on more spin-offs, right? Like maybe Monolith Soft is working on a spin-off, they could start making more 2D Zelda games, like there's options for sure, but I feel like some of that, maybe just save some of the other Zelda games.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely going to want to space it out in some way.
Yeah.
I think they're all somewhat possible. It's just a matter of which ones are going to be the one to take certain time slots.
Right. That makes sense. That's really exactly it. Because if we were just talking about like assuming there is no sources for anything, like just tell me to guess what would make sense for like legacy content to put out for a 35th anniversary for Zelda, I would maybe guess Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask. But when you consider that we're getting Skyward Sword HD this year, we're getting Age of Calamity DLC this year, potentially Breath of the Wild 2, if not this year, soon after, and then we've heard from a few different sources suggesting Wind Waker and Twilight Princess are right around the corner. Like that's at that point, like which ones actually make it out, right? So it's kind of hard to say. There's also like a Spirit Tracks rumor, which I don't know how you fit that one in there, but there's just a lot of options.
Yeah, and there's so many games to choose from anyway. Like the Oracle games, like you mentioned, those games would actually make sense because they're not very available anymore now. Mm-hmm. Like unless you still own like the original cartridges, or I think it was only on the 3DS Virtual Console. Aside from that, so it's not the easiest game to get your hands on nowadays.
Yeah,
might
be on the Wii U eShop, but maybe.
I'm not sure.
You can play DS I don't think games in the Wii U eShop, but I don't know if that's there. I don't know. Maybe, but I haven't checked.
Well, the Oracle games are like Game Boy Color. Those are old games.
They might be on 3DS.
Yeah, they are definitely on 3DS. Yeah. But I think that's the only place you can still get them digitally right now. Yeah, and many people sold their 3DS after the Switch kind of took over the handheld spot.
Yeah, I could also see the Oracle games being kind of saved for later as for remake purposes, though. Like I mentioned earlier.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I see
Like, I much
listings
ra-
for 3DS eShop, by the way, not Wii U.
Okay.
I think
Like,
Link's Awakening, one of the reasons they mentioned they wanted to remake that was because it was like very hard to actually play nowadays.
So yeah, for the same reason basically. But of course, I would much rather see a new 2D Zelda game developed in the same engine as Link's Awakening. But you know, I don't know if that's gonna happen. I would say give Grezzo a shot. Do the same thing they did with Capcom back in the day. Just let them develop their own game. Just supervise them and let them try it out. You know, Capcom ended up making some amazing Zelda games. Like Minish Cap was amazing. The Oracle games are amazing.
Yeah. We're kind of overdue for a 2D game too, because a lot of the 2D offerings we've gotten has been kind of derived from some kind of older title.
Yeah, when did Link Between Worlds come out?
Great question. I don't know.
It was like
2014?
Yeah, 2013, I think.
Yeah.
I know Triforce Heroes was technically the last original new
Link
2D Zelda
Worlds
game.
is November 2022, 2013.
2013.
Yeah, Triforce Heroes was 2015, so 2015 is the last time we had and that was not even a real 2D.
Yeah, it's not a mainline
spin-off.
game even.
Yeah, it's a spin-off.
You can make the argument that that's spin-off, and then Link Between Worlds is reusing an older map. So it's, if you go by that, it's been even longer than that.
True.
Yeah. I would consider Link Between Worlds a new 2D Zelda.
It's kind of like it's kind of a spiritual successor, spiritual sequel.
It's a sequel.
Someone actually lately came up with a cool idea. It's like the Oracle games were actually originally supposed to be 3 games, but one of them got scrapped. What if they make the 3rd game? That would be cool.
Very cool. Yeah, I'd be down for that.
I feel like if they do that, they probably would remake the originals though first.
Yeah,
so they actually play those.
They can kind of make the 3rd game and treat it like almost like a sequel sort of mentality.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
Because they kind of did the same thing for Link Between Worlds, where it's a new game, but just, reusing the map from A Link to the Past.
Yeah.
So why not make that 3rd game and kind of reuse certain ideas from the other Oracle games, and just, but it's a new game. It's not the same story.
I'd like to see that. I feel like that'd be kind of like a happy middle ground for sure. So there's quite a few things I want to get into the chat. We'll have to come back to chat later into the discussion because we are an hour into the podcast almost, and we technically haven't dived into the topics yet. Technically, we've touched upon it, right? We've been sort of scratching at the surface for a while, but I think now we should actually dive into it. So, basically, Nintendo started sharing out news we heard that there was going to be like Zelda news coming, and we got Zelda news this week. We got a few different things. Age of Calamity news, and we got a Skyward Sword HD news. So let me see here what I can sort of, because we got an actual information on the Age of Calamity stuff. So, and actually, okay, so this was actually an image that was shared by Samus Hunter, a leaker we've talked about on the channel, who's shared a lot of things ahead of time and been right about it. So let me just kind of show you this post from Samus Hunter. Here, Samus Hunter was alluding to the Age of Calamity news we'd be getting, and she showed off the Mii costume of the Guardian costume stuff, and here it is. The bonus content for Age of Calamity is Guardian armor for Link in Age of Calamity. But then also we actually got the actual names for the different waves for the DLC. So in June we're getting Pulse of the Ancients, which is going to give us an expanded roster, new weapon types, new challenges in Royal Ancient Lab, and a newly added challenging enemies. Great. And then in November, we're getting Guardian of Remembrance, so new character vignettes, new stages, expanded roster, new battle skills for existing characters. So you have both of those things coming out in November. And that is the extent of the Age of Calamity stuff, but I'll tell you that it does kind of, again, sort of increase the credibility of Samus Hunter, in my opinion. It's another one of many different things that they've talked about beforehand happening and then happens. So it's very, very interesting. But the other point to be made here is that it seems like now Nintendo's kind of getting out a lot of like the smaller Zelda stuff, right? Like we're getting information about Skyward Sword. They gave us the Amiibo. We'll talk about the controversy in a little bit. But all of this, it feels like they're getting out like a lot of like the smaller Zelda news first, perhaps so they can focus solely on Breath of the Wild 2 when we get that in June. What do you guys make of that possibility?
Yeah, I think so. Especially if they are going to at some point do something for the 35th anniversary, like if they're gonna have like a similar Mario type direct like they had last year, but for Zelda, they want to get as much stuff out of the way right now before that starts, which would probably be around September. Because I remember a lot of people were kind of bummed that Nintendo skipped over Zelda's 35th anniversary. Like, they've always done that. Like, they don't treat the actual date of the first game as the anniversary date. They just the entire year goes for them in that regard. So yeah, I definitely see them getting that stuff out of the way now, so later they can focus on new stuff, like you said.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because we haven't gotten any 35th anniversary branded stuff yet, right? Because when you think about it, like Skyward Sword was branded for the 25th anniversary, right? It came out November of 2011. So conceivably, you know, maybe Breath of the Wild 2 comes out around then. And I've seen some people maybe argue that because we're getting Wave 2 of the Age of Calamity DLC, there's no way that happens. But I really feel like this Age of Calamity DLC is very, very minor. Like, I don't think it's significant enough to really impact release timing too much for Breath of the Wild 2, assuming it's ready. What do you guys think of that?
Oh, no. It's a separate game, too. Third party.
Yeah.
And separate developers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't really see it getting in the way at all.
It doesn't seem like there's... From the description of it, it doesn't seem like there's, like, entire, like, huge new story elements to it or any kind of, like... It just seems like new challenges and enemies and gear and...
There's some new stages.
It's something that if you're really, really into Age of Calamity, if you're the kind of person that's like putting hundreds of hours into it, this DLC is perfect for you. But that's a small sort of segment of the Age of Calamity sort of audience, right? Like, I think most Age of Calamity players bought the game, played through the main adventure, and then don't plan on picking it up again. That's kind of where I fall, right? The DLC is not going to encourage me to pick it up again. I'm not interested in it. And it's not to say I don't think I don't think poorly of the game. I really enjoyed my experience, but I'm just saying there's a smaller group of people that are going to get the DLC than the people who bought the whole game, right? And even then, those Age of Calamity fans, that's just a small group. Still a big group, right? Quite a few million people bought Age of Calamity. Like, it sold really well, but still it's like a smaller segment of the Breath of the Wild fan base, right? So it's kind of like you're really whittling down the amount of people that would be interested in this product. So it's kind of hard for me to imagine that the second wave of the DLC of Age of Calamity is gonna be like the replacement Zelda game or Zelda content for the holiday. I just don't see that happening.
No.
Yeah, I don't see it happening either. And mind you, I went through every single mission in that game. I 100%ed it, and I don't really feel inclined to buy the DLC either.
Okay.
I feel like the main draw of the game for most people was like the story element and like seeing everything 100 years ago and all that stuff. And if they don't really add a ton to that and like add new cutscenes and things, and I just don't think most people are gonna be interested in it.
Yeah, there might be some new cutscenes. If it's gonna have a new stage, there's probably gonna have to be some reason why you're there.
Mm-hmm.
So it might take place in between something, like, before they went to do that, they first went on a side mission here. I don't see something happening after the end credits. Maybe, but...
I mean, I could see us getting a small trailer for Age of Calamity in an E3 Direct. And it wouldn't even be necessarily close to like Breath of the Wild 2 stuff. Like the same way how like they had sort of like a Zelda segment in the February Direct and the Age of Calamity stuff was like way before that. I could see the exact same thing playing out for an Age of Calamity trailer during an E3 Direct.
I think it's going to be very comparable to the DLC we got for Breath of the Wild. Like, Breath of the Wild, same price, $19.99, I think it was. So $20.
Yeah.
you got a couple of new small stages, a couple of new, like 4 new cutscenes, I think, or 5. And that's about it. Most of the other stuff was all masks and outfits and things like that. And, you know, the final trial wasn't even that long, but it was a new extra stage, basically. So I think it's going to be comparable to that. Some new stages, some new outfits here and there.
So let me pose a question for you guys. Do you think perhaps the reason why we haven't seen trailers for Age of Calamity DLC yet is because that the content of that would have something to do with Breath of the Wild 2?
Oh, I've never thought about that, to be honest.
I don't see how.
Let me see.
I have
here.
a hard time imagining what that would look like.
So
I mean, I could.
Wave 1 is going to have an expanded roster. Who are going to be the roster expansions? I don't know. New weapon types. They could probably pull in more weapons from Breath of the Wild, but maybe there could be weapon types from Breath of the Wild too, right? New challenges in the Royal Ancient Lab. That could be anything. Newly added challenging enemies. What kind of enemies could they add? Are there some there could be some enemies that they could bring in from Breath of the Wild still. Like, I don't think we saw the Molduga in Age of Calamity, did we?
No, they were in there.
They were in there. They were in there. Was there any enemies missing? I mean, there weren't that many, right? They could just add more color variations, I guess. Like, did we see the white Lynel or the golden Lynel in Age of Calamity?
Yeah, maybe golden type enemies. Those were not in the game.
Yeah, sure. They added that in the DLC of Breath of the Wild. So,
but I guess the suggestion I'm making here is that conceivably, and I'm not saying to expect this, guys. I'm just posing it as a possibility that if you consider there could be random characters and random weapon types and random enemies that are from Breath of the Wild too. They could be added in Wave 1 that we don't know about, like conceivably, and maybe they show that off at E3. Maybe. I'm skeptical of that, but you know, it's maybe a possibility, right? And looking at Weapon 2, new character vignettes, new stages, expanded roster, so expanded roster even more so. Like, how many more characters can they add, right? So maybe this would be from Breath of the Wild 2. New battle skills for existing characters.
It's if it's going to be existing characters, well, like most of those characters are dead in Breath of the Wild, right?
Right. But they are going to expand the roster even more in Wave 2.
I mean, if they do anything like they did with the first Hyrule Warriors, they could probably just approach it with a villain story.
Yeah.
First Hyrule Warriors had like that free, I think it was like a free update or something that they gave you the story of like Olga and some of the other villains in the game.
Sure.
Yeah.
You could just do that, and then some of the new enemies are technically like characters from the like heroes.
Right, they were already in the game.
Right.
They just you can play as them now. So like Wave 1 could be Purah and Robbie, right? We could see how they were able to get to where they were going to go because they were off screen for a few missions.
I think they even have voice clips for them already.
You're right. I think for Wave 2, they could conceivably add, like, it doesn't have to be like 6 characters per wave. It could be just 2 characters per wave, right? And the other 2 characters in Wave 2 could be Suga, right? Did I get his name right? And evil guy.
Astor,
right, yeah. So
that
they could
would
add
be
those
cool.
2. Yeah. And that was it. Like, they don't it doesn't have to be that many characters, right? But like they say expanded roster, like maybe there's more than that, but it could just be 2 and 2.
I think it would also fit because Suga he fights with 2 blades. And we didn't really have that in like a duo katana.
That'd be interesting.
That didn't really so that would also explain the expanded weapons, the new weapon types.
Good point. Yeah. So I mean, I feel like this is pretty believable stuff, and it doesn't have to. There's nothing here that has to be like, oh, we're totally getting Breath of the Wild 2 content here. It could all be just expanding upon what they already established in Age of Calamity. Yeah,
I do have to say I'm a little bit confused with the information that they gave out on that card that you showed before.
Sure.
I mean, maybe it's a language barrier, but I don't even know what character vignettes means. I thought a vignette is like a border, like at the edge of your screen.
I'm not sure what they're referring to there either.
I have no idea what they're talking about. And also it says new characters, but then in the second one it says in the first one it says expanded roster, but isn't that the same thing? A roster and characters?
So just so we're all on the same page, I went and Googled vignette, a brief evocative description, account, or episode. So my interpretation is basically more sort of summaries, lore to read about these different characters, right? Like there were some things we could run and read about the different characters. I feel like they'll just expand upon that in the DLC.
Okay, that is cool. So we could maybe learn more about Robbie and Pura, for instance, because they didn't really have a big role.
Yeah.
They kind of just disappear and then they pop back up in the end.
Exactly. That's what I could kind of see happening there, and maybe we could learn a bit more about Astor's background as well, right? And there's a whole bunch of theories surrounding Astor, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and also like what happens to Suga, because Suga's not in Breath of the Wild. Like what happens to him? Does he just die of old age? Like, you know, maybe there's something there to give us more information of what happened to him, and maybe that gives us more perspective on the Yiga clan, right?
Well, I think there's definitely potential for Suga for sure, because Suga actually is implied to die during Age of Calamity, right? He just disappear. You don't see him. You don't see him die. It's just like one cutscene he's there, and then the next one he isn't, and then it's like Masakoga's all alone, and you're like, wait, what happened to Suga? Okay, apparently he died.
Yeah, but
maybe it turns out he was alive all this time. Huh?
They gave him some level of importance, right? So it was surprising.
Yeah, it was just weird. Like it was just, okay, he's gone now. But you don't see him actually die. It is implied that he did. He kind of just like sacrificed himself while fighting Astor and his guys. And like one chapter later, Koga is there, but he's without Suga. So maybe he was still alive all this time. And like we play a whole story section with him.
I feel like that's what's going to happen. Like it seems it's one of those things that I think they're just going to fill out. I kind of feel that way.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how this all sort of ties together. In the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's going to be anything major. But you know, if you have Age of Calamity and you want to get into the DLC, like it's going to be fun. It's going to be something to see for sure. But let's dive into the Skyward Sword situation. So there's multiple angles to this, right? Like, so there's perhaps the very exciting angle of what this implies about Breath of the Wild 2. We'll get to that, but I think maybe first we should tackle, and we don't have to focus too much on this, but I just kind of want your opinions on this. Like, just like the situation regarding the Amiibo. So basically, we're getting this awesome Zelda and Loftwing Amiibo. It's Princess Zelda, or Student Zelda from Skyward Sword, and a blue Loftwing together as one big awesome Amiibo for $25, and it's separate from the game. There's no bundles, and when you scan it into Skyward Sword, it gives you the ability to teleport to the sky or back to the ground, and it even can take you out of dungeons. It's kind of like maybe a souped up version of Pharaoh's Wind. Some people have been calling it like some form of fast travel. At the very least, it would speed up the gameplay a little bit in order to get from the sky to the ground, for sure. And when I first saw it, I'll be real with you guys, I just thought it was cool. I didn't care about the functionality at all. I just saw this awesome Amiibo and I was like, I want the Amiibo. This is going to be great. And that's pretty much it. But then I noticed that, people were like, oh, wait, that's first of all, I never saw the price. So that was one thing. I started seeing people complain about the price. And yeah, I would say 25 is a little high, but there are some Amiibos that are bigger, that are a little bit more expensive. And this has two figures in one.
The Guardian Amiibo is 25.
Which makes sense. It's kind of a more involved, bigger Amiibo. So that doesn't surprise me. But I guess the other angle that's kind of like really weird here is that we're getting this quality of life update, but it's locked behind an Amiibo. Now, I'm one of those people that tries to not make assumptions. I try. I'm human. I still do. But it's still conceivable that maybe there's more quality of life updates in Skyward Sword. Maybe there's an item you unlock later on to the game that still gives you the same sort of ease of traveling up and down through the game. But at this point, all we know is that the Amiibo has this feature where you can travel up and down to the sky and below very quickly. But anyway, that's sort of what has been going on. People have been debating about this. Is this a good thing for Nintendo to do? You know, like there's a little bit of controversy there. What are your guys' thoughts on this?
Can I just say real quick? I'm just gonna quickly head to the bathroom, so I'll let you guys do your thing, and I'll just give my 2 cents after I come back.
Sure.
So I guess I'll just start
Yeah,
my
go for it.
take on it. All right. So I understand why there's frustration there, because I can understand the idea of thinking that there's a fast travel system that's essentially locked behind an amiibo, and just like you, Andres, I'm in the same boat where it's kind of like I just want the amiibo. I don't really care too much about the feature. But I do see why, if there's someone out there who is maybe they're not totally into amiibos, maybe they're just they just want to play Skyward Sword again. I can see why they could be frustrated. Like I understand where the frustration is coming from.
Yeah,
and I do think that the feature itself, maybe I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it also remembers exactly where you were standing too,
Yes.
right? Where you come back.
It will only bring you back to where you came. You can't just go anywhere. It's not like a full fast travel system. You have to go exactly back where you came from.
So, because I'm trying to imagine like hypotheticals here. So, in theory, couldn't you, like, let's say you're going through this dungeon, you're having trouble with it for whatever reason, couldn't you just be in front of the boss door, fly up to the shop, buy a bunch of items, come back, and just go straight to the boss that way?
seems kind of like it.
I think that's what's kind of
Yeah.
meant for, I guess.
Yeah, because it sounds like a very powerful tool, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Like,
but
for that
you know,
reason alone, like,
you know what? It reminds me of what they did in Twilight Princess HD, where there was like the Ganondorf amiibo that gave you the blue hearts, right? Where it was extra damage.
yeah.
I don't remember what the Zelda and Link ones did, but they each had like some sort of
They
little
give
feature
you money.
there. They gave you money. So they were different things, and to be totally honest, like just me personally, I never felt like using them. And part of the thing with it is that like you kind of have to scan it in every time you would load up the game.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that if for the Zelda and Loftwing Amiibo, you don't just scan it in once and you have the feature for the rest of the game. Like you have to kind of continually use it if you want to use this feature, which to me is annoying. I want to put the Amiibo somewhere and just sort of leave it there and forget about
I just want to leave it in the box.
So like,
Yeah.
I don't know how practical this really is, right? Like, is it going to be more practical than having to get to a statue, fly there, go back, and go to where you were? Sure. But is it practical in general to have to use the amiibo every time? And I'm not sure exactly how those mechanics work. Maybe you only have to scan it once and you can use it for a day or something. I don't know. But I don't know. It just seems a
Trailer
little
definitely
inconvenient.
implied that you need to just scan it every
Every time you want to use the mechanic.
Right, yeah.
So, that doesn't seems like almost more like a little gimmick kind of thing, like not maybe that big of a deal.
It doesn't even seem like it's super helpful. Like, I'm playing through Skyward Sword, there wasn't really many times where I was like, I really need to be in the sky right this second. And, when I did need to be in it, it kind of felt balanced. Like, I was relying on my preparation to get me through a certain amount of the game. Like, these are my potions, this is my limit. Like, if I can just go at any time and refill all my potions and do all this stuff like in any time I want, or I'm low in health, let me just fly to the sky and completely break the entire game right now. It's like, I don't see, it doesn't seem like it's, because the game's balanced for the statues and the way it's set up, and I feel like it's balanced
speeds things up
very well.
It speeds things up. I guess
I'm
it just
back, by
makes
the
it...
way.
Oh, welcome back, my friend. But I guess for some people it will speed up that gameplay a lot. And Skyward Sword, I thought the game was great, but one sort of I feel like valid criticism is that the game is a little slow paced. There are some parts that are a little bit longer than others, and all of the going back and forth between Skyloft and the ground does lengthen things a bit. And the Loftwing Amiibo does kind of grant you that opportunity to speed things up a little bit. Again, the fact that you kind of have to sort of scan it in, presumably repeatedly to use the mechanic, kind of takes away from that, I think, a little bit. But, I can see how some people might find that to be a little weird. I feel like the best way for Nintendo to handle this is sure, if you want to have that option early on, get your Zelda and Loftwing Amiibo, appreciate it as a collector's item, but also have some sort of item you can collect in the game that gives you the exact same feature. You just have to actually explore a little bit to get it. I could
definitely see that.
Most of Skyward Sword's pacing issues is in the last third of the game. It's not even in the first, 2/3. Like that part where you have to go collect that song go collect all the Tatones and stuff. That part could have been totally omitted, in my opinion. It was just one extra dragging bit, having to revisit every area again.
Wasn't like the woods like submerged or something?
Yeah, they did change that up.
Yeah, and we don't even know if they maybe
segment.
changed that, but
Right.
yeah.
I mean, I would say that the feature is definitely a lot more useful than the Twilight Princess ones. But you know that even if you don't feel that it is like not essential to the game, there is definitely going to be people out there who feel like it is.
Right.
And is going to want to keep, scanning it just to be able to do that.
Some people will play with it right next to them and just kind of use it.
Right, yeah. And I'm definitely not the type of person who would use that feature. The only time I've ever actually, to think about it, the only time I've ever used any of these amiibos with any of these Zelda games was specifically the Ganondorf amiibo with Twilight Princess HD.
Just to make the game hard.
Because I wanted to make the game harder for myself. I did the 3 hard challenge with Ganondorf active the entire game.
It means basically if someone sneezes on you, you die.
Yeah. There were some enemies like that, which is 1-hit kill. But yeah, that was the only time. But other than that, I don't see myself using it. But again, I do understand where the frustration is coming from for people who do want to, speed up a game that is known for being pretty slow. And having it, tied to an amiibo that they may not even want in the first place. Like, I can understand it. I'm not somebody who is particularly, with them. Like, I'm not in that crowd. But I do think it's an understandable take.
Yeah.
I will tell you, if for people who really, really don't want the amiibo, but they want the functionality, somebody somewhere will probably upload a downloadable, NFC file, some kind of file that you can download to an NFC chip. Because I had a friend who literally had every single Smash amiibo on these little tiny squares that were NFC chips, and he just had all the amiibos. He could use all the functionality on all of them, and I'm pretty sure there's still people who upload it for every single amiibo.
Yeah, I don't.
So you
think...
can just buy this cheap little $5 NFC chip, download it from your PC, and boom.
I don't think Nintendo will be okay with that. So
no, in official capacity, don't do this. But know that
not endorsing that.
We're not endorsing it. We're just telling you that it's a thing.
Yeah, you don't have to endorse it, but
I won't tell you where you can get it or to get it, but I will tell you can probably get it.
It exists.
I actually had a bit of a quote unquote rant about this whole situation on one of my streams last week.
Yeah.
Or this week actually. So for some people it might feel like I'm repeating myself, but if you will indulge me, I think this whole situation is it's blown out of proportion, and it's another example of people jumping on a bandwagon, just hating. Half of those people don't even know what they're talking about. Like you said, the price of the amiibo already, that's point number one. There's already been amiibo who were valued higher. The quality of amiibos has increased since the first batch significantly. That's also a reason why they rose in value. And to be honest, the whole quote unquote fast travel thing that comes with it, it's a cheat. It's not a quality of life improvement, guys. It's just not. A lot of people compare it with the Swift Sail from the Wind Waker HD. But the Swift Sail was something that should have always been in the Wind Waker. It was a flaw from that game. You shouldn't have to change the wind direction every time for the rest of the game. At some point in the game, that should have been streamlined, And with Twilight Princess, they did some quality of life improvements, like making the bug collections a little bit easier, a little bit more streamlined as well. Ocarina of Time, being able to equip the iron boots to a face button instead of having to go into the menu. Those are quality of life improvements. Skyward Sword has 30 bird statues scattered all across the game, and they're pretty well spaced out to a point that you don't have to spend hours getting back to the sky again. They're even inside dungeons, And I feel like this fast travel mechanic, it just ruins the point of the game. Because you're supposed to go down to the surface. It's dangerous there compared to above the surface. You're supposed to survive there. It's already not a very difficult game in and of itself. And now I can just, right in front of the boss room, I can just warp back to the sky, stock up on potions, and go back to the boss and defeat it even more easily than I should. So it's really not a quality of life improvement of the game itself. If anything, it's kind of one of those things you want to do after you've already completed the game, just for the fun of it, you know. How is that different than the stuff you can do with the amiibo in Breath of the Wild, where you can get a better horse or some better equipment by scanning amiibos? Those are not quality of life improvements, they're just extras that you can get. And that's the whole point of an amiibo. The reason why amiibo are expensive is you're not just paying for a figurine, you're also getting digital content to go with it. That's why they're expensive. You can use them in Smash, you can use them in later games that haven't even released right now. There's technology in those things as well. So to say like $25 is an absolute like rip-off, I think that's ridiculous. The amiibo is way bigger. It's basically 2 characters in one. Like I said, it has technology inside of it. You don't have to buy it. You can just skip it. You don't have to own everything. If it really is that much of a problem, if the price is that much of a issue for you, just don't buy it, you know?
Yeah, I think part of the prop, there's a couple of different elements to this, right? I mean, I'm kind of in a similar boat with you, Don. Shifty, I think we're all kind of like, I think all of us here are like sort of on the same page, right? Like, we don't need the mechanic to want to play Skyward Sword. Like, I have zero interest. I may never use, even if I have the amiibo, I may never use it. Like, I might use it once just to see how it works out of curiosity, but I'm not, to me, it doesn't feel that essential. But I guess I can understand why some people may feel that way, but there's a few other angles to this, right? So like, there's like the whole scalper situation, which I don't know what you can do about that. Like, there's pre-orders and people have bought them and now they're selling them on eBay for more expensive. It's a cool looking figurine. It's unfortunate, but what are you gonna do? I guess Nintendo could make more, right? And they probably will. So there's that element.
There hasn't been a company who can deal with that properly as of right now. Nvidia is a victim of it. Like everything that has been released as of late that is expensive has been, like the PS5, just for Christ's sake, it's been scalped to death at this point.
Yeah.
I feel like if you make some kind of hardware, that hardware is gonna be hard to come by.
If you have an audience of fans that are rabid for you, it's gonna happen.
I think people forgot how Amiibo used to be, where you literally couldn't get any of them.
Yeah, there's a lot that are just, if you have every single Amiibo, you have to devote your life to it, maybe. But I'll tell you that there's another element to this, right? And that's kind of just Skyward Sword itself. Like, people have been criticizing the price tag of the game, because it's $60. And people compare it to Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD, where they argue that those games have more content and Skyward Sword doesn't. So I guess there's two things.
Those were $50.
They were $50, right? In fairness. And I think the Twilight Princess actually came bundled with Wolf Link for $60, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's the one I got.
So yeah, that's the one I got. It was great. But, you know, that was back on the Wii U, where sales were poor in general. Nintendo kind of needed better deals in general to push sales more. So it was a different situation, I would say. Meanwhile, on Switch, everything sells at full price. The Switch still hasn't seen a price drop. It may not see a price drop this year. Nintendo doesn't really need to do one. So because of the success of the Switch, Nintendo doesn't have as much of a need to increase, I guess, the value proposition for the different bundles. But I also think it's perhaps a little bit of a... I don't like making assumptions because we don't necessarily know all the details about Skyward Sword HD yet. We may very well know all the details already, but the game hasn't come out yet, right? We haven't seen reviews of the game yet. Maybe we should wait.
We've barely seen anything.
Right, like maybe we shouldn't judge it yet, its price tag yet, until we know the full value proposition. Like, I've seen some people making arguments that the controls are going to be bad. Based off what precedent?
Yeah, there's nothing to base that on, and
yeah,
I just don't understand why a price tag of $25 in the case of the Amiibo, why that would warrant such like a
people not understand
response.
How much figurines cost. Like, that's low. That's really low.
I was just about to say that. Go to any website, look up a Lord of the Rings figurine. You're paying like hundreds of bucks for some of them, and those you cannot even use them for like in game or anything like that. And the amiibo is surprisingly high quality. And I just want to also say up front, like, I am absolutely not some, because that's one of the biggest arguments you get against you once you start defending this stuff, is they tell you, oh, you're just excusing Nintendo, you're a Nintendo fanboy or a Nintendo shill or whatever kind of argument they make like that. Like, I've been fully a supporter of free Melee. I've talked about Mario 3D also as being limited edition. I think that's a terrible thing. And there's been plenty of moments where I've disagreed with Nintendo's practices, like out loud, and where I'm like, no, I don't agree with these practices at all. You can disagree with Nintendo's business choices, but that doesn't mean that if you like defend one thing, you're automatically like devoted to Nintendo, you know?
I'll tell
That's
you
just
that
not true.
I personally would have preferred for Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze to have come out for $40 or $50. Considering that they hardly added any new content and the original release was $50 on the Wii U, I would have preferred that. And I'll even concede that I would have preferred Skyward Sword to be a little bit cheaper too. But at the same time, I mean, I'm probably still going to get it. I appreciate that it's going to be 60 frames per second and it's going to be in HD and it's going to have traditional controls. All of those things kind of get me interested to play the game again. So, you know, it's, well, I guess, worth it to me, but it's definitely one of those things where, like, if I maybe wasn't like a Nintendo YouTuber, I might wait a little bit longer to pick it up. So I totally understand why some people may not want to pick it up for $60.
Well, how many trailers have we had for Skyward Sword HD?
2?
Since it's been announced.
I guess the Amiibo trailer is the second one.
No. Well, yeah, okay, not counting the. I'm not really counting that one because it barely showed any gameplay. So one. Okay, so go back to Twilight Princess HD and Wind Waker HD, the first announcement trailers. They didn't show anything about the quality of life improvements they made to those games. They didn't show how they shortened the Triforce chart quests in Wind Waker. They didn't show the bug collecting, how they streamlined that. How can we base anything right now? What else can we know about what else they changed later on in the game? You know, plus I keep saying plus, like
Switch.
I don't think people. I don't think people also realize how hard it is to go, like what they are doing with the controls. Like the controls alone already make the game worth the money, in my opinion, because they have to go into the original build of the game, completely revamp the controls from the ground up, because the Wiimotes work with completely different types of data than the Joy-Cons. And to top it off, they added a completely new controller functionality, so you don't have to play with motion controls. And it runs at 60, and we don't even know what else has been improved to the game. So to say it's an old game, it shouldn't be $60. Yeah, it would have been nice if it was $40, but to say it's not worth it, it's too early to say right now.
Yeah, and actually to your point about the controls, because we recently got, there was like this Metroid Prime trilogy sort of debacle about a week or so ago. What was his name? Michael Wakan, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, if I'm remembering it correctly. An ex-lead designer from Retro Studios on Facebook was talking about how it'd be really hard to get Prime Trilogy or Prime 3 Corruption working appropriately on Switch. To your point, like getting the motion controls working is a lot of work. Even we've seen interviews where Eiji Aonuma told us that it would be almost impossible to get traditional controls in Skyward Sword. It happened.
Oh yeah, they
did it.
Put a lot of man hours.
Right, but I guess yeah, exactly. The point is that we don't know necessarily how much work that would take. It probably did cost them quite a few, you know, it required resources to get that working. They had to put a team together to get that to go, and it took some time. So, you know, it's not like these games have no work being done to them. I would say Skyward Sword HD very likely had a lot more work done to it than what we were seeing for 3D All-Stars. Some people may argue otherwise because it's 3 games in 1, and then there's a whole nice UI, but they're being emulated. Like, Skyward Sword HD is in 60 frames per second, and they changed around the motion controls. Like, there's
so
work
much
done
work.
There.
Is. If you don't know anything about game design or game development, like going back into the original code, Like this is, some people say it's just a glorified port. It's not a port if you actually are recoding the game like that. And yeah, maybe the graphics, because of the graphical style itself, there isn't a lot to improve. Just make it look more crisp, and you're good to go. Like it's not like Twilight Princess. That game really needed a graphical update because the original game was ugly as sin. Now, if you look back at it, especially if you didn't have the correct component cables, that game is so much more blurry than people remember it to be. Like Twilight Princess HD is how people think they remember Twilight Princess looking like back in the day. But
I remember having so many discussions, like just trying to tell people, no, they changed like every texture in the game. It does look different. You just remember it. You guys have bad memory.
But like Nintendo, in a lot of ways, they are, in some regards, they are in terms of gaming content, let's put it that way, they are the Apple of the gaming industry. You know you're getting high quality stuff, but it costs a little bit more. But you always know it's going to be good. It's rare that a first party Nintendo game is just not good at all. And I think $60, it can be expensive. Then, like again, same with the Amiibo. You just don't buy it if you don't want it. Get a Wii. Get Skyward Sword, and play it that way or something like that. But I don't think the response to the price is that necessary. It's been going. Not to mention, do you honestly think Nintendo corporate is reading tweets? Like 95% of Nintendo corporate doesn't even speak English, and the ones that do are running a huge company. They're not going to go to Twitter to see what people have to say about the price tag.
I think it kind of depends on how significant the controversy becomes, right?
Yeah, of course.
It kind of varies. And to your point, though, like, there's a lot of people that'll complain about the price. And to be clear, I'm not arguing that you're wrong in your opinion. Like, if you don't think it's a good value proposition for you, then don't buy it, right? But, I guess the point we're trying to make here is that we're not entirely sure what's going on behind the scenes. Like, there's a number of reasonings as to the pricing that they're going with. And again, I do feel like they are probably pricing at $60 because they know they can get away with it, right? But, if people buy it, then that sort of validates their pricing. It's just a different time for Nintendo.
I think it's also because Skyward Sword is one of the worst, if not the worst, selling Zelda game, 3D Zelda game. So there were not that many people. I think it only sold like 3 million. I think Age of Calamity even sold more than Link's Crossbow Training sold more than Skyward Sword.
I think this time around Skyward Sword, even though it's going to be at $60 and it's going to have that amiibo and there's some controversy behind it, I feel like it's probably still going to break that threshold. Sword and Shield, far more significant controversy, I would say. And that game is 20 plus million. And it's probably going to continue to sell. It's like, the second or third best selling Pokemon games of all time. So it's done pretty well despite the controversy. So I feel like Skyward Sword is probably going to get better.
That's also why I brought up the tweets, because the most effective way to deal with these kind of situations is not to get into arguments with each other on Twitter and stuff like that, because all it does is we're going to be fighting amongst ourselves, and Nintendo is going to run away with the money anyway, because people will buy it. Just look at 3D All-Stars. The sales are good.
There was controversy behind that one as well. People were arguing that it wasn't valuable enough, it wasn't good value proposition, yet it still sold gangbusters.
Yeah, there you go. Like, vote with your wallet if it's really that much of an issue, but they know that the demand is there and that enough people are going to buy it. And don't bash on those people who do want to buy it because they want to buy it. They think it's worth their money. Like, it's funnily enough, I don't own a single Amiibo. As a Nintendo fan, that might be a disgrace, but I don't. It's not my thing. I don't like collecting. I'm not a collector, so I just skip those things. Like I vote. Well, not necessarily vote with my wallet, but I spend my money on those things I feel like are worth my money. I didn't buy the Skyward Sword Joy-Cons. I didn't buy Mario 3D All-Stars. It's okay not to own certain things. I think there's this weird thing where people, they want all the benefits, but they don't want to pay the money, but like they want to own everything. And it's okay not to own anything. I've never played with Wolf Link in Breath of the Wild because I don't have the Wolf Link amiibo, and that's fine, you know. I'm not going to make useful. Yeah, well, it would have been fun, of course, to try it, and but it's like I said, it's not the end of the world to not be able to own everything and do everything in those games.
I hear you. And actually, I kind of want to use this as an opportunity to sort of pivot a little bit. So you never got to play with the Wolf Link amiibo, right? And
no.
And I guess from your perspective, right, it's not that it wasn't interesting, but it wasn't interesting enough to buy it and then have this figurine that you don't really want to put anywhere, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like instead of buying those kinds of things, I bought Resident Evil 8. You know, that's where my money went these last 3 months. So yeah.
I get what you're saying or coming from. Yeah.
I just didn't feel it was worth the money. Plus, I hate pre-orders. So when the Skyward Sword Joy-Cons went up, I was like, nope, I'm not going to play this game. I'm not going to refresh pages to get my pre-order for these things. Even though I kind of could use a new set of Wiimotes, or not Wiimotes.
Joy-Cons. Yeah.
Joy-Cons.
Yeah.
Because one of them is drifting, but you know, I just don't have that drive where I have, something new is coming up, I have to have it. Also, like even as an example for the Skyward Sword release, you can also just wait a couple of months, see what the game is about, hear what people have to say, and then buy it. You don't have to buy it at release. If you're really afraid that the game won't have the amount of content that warrants that $60 price for you, just wait a bit, you know? It's fine.
Yeah. I mean, you know, if you wait a year or two, there may even be a price drop, right? So, you know.
Exactly.
Timing. But, and actually, you know, people are concerned about the amiibo situation with scalping. My impression, and I could be mistaken, but I feel like we're going to get, this amiibo is going to become a little bit more readily available as time goes on, because I have a feeling this amiibo might be more important than Nintendo's leading on. So that's what I'm thinking. And I love how the music transitioned to the more creepy Metroid music, because it's kind of a little spooky right now. So hear me out, guys. I put out a video a couple days ago. If you saw the video, you know where I'm coming from with you here. But basically, I feel like there's a good chance this amiibo is going to have functionality in the sequel to Breath of the Wild. I think there's a really good chance it's going to happen, because I feel like it's a very similar situation to the Wolf Link amiibo. And some people may argue, well, why didn't Nintendo just announce that functionality now? Interesting. If you're asking that, I'm glad you would, because Onyx, down. You're not the amiibo. No. Anyway, sorry. So basically, when Twilight Princess HD was announced with the Wolf Link amiibo, that was months before E3. It wasn't until E3 2016 that they showed off the amiibo functionality for the Wolf Link amiibo, and that's where you discovered that Wolf Link would actually be playable, or it could be like your companion in Breath of the Wild through the amiibo. In other words, a little bit before E3, we get this amiibo announcement of an HD remastered Zelda. It's a similar situation. Twilight Princess HD right before Breath of the Wild, Skyward Sword HD right before Breath of the Wild 2. We're approaching E3. I wouldn't be surprised if this Zelda and Loftwing amiibo actually scans in like Link's Loftwing into the sequel to Breath of the Wild.
Oh, I would love that. That is a very smart observation, by the way. I never thought about that.
Thank you. But so it kind of like fuels my theory, though, because I've been thinking about it for a while, like what if the sequel to Breath of the Wild has Loftwings or some sort of flying option in the game? Because supposedly we're returning to Hyrule, right? And they're gonna have to expand in various ways to make it interesting. One way is to just add more content to the land. Another way is to perhaps give us a dark world or expand the borders or go underground. But another option is to go to the sky. Hyrule Castle is rising from the ground. And if we know anything about the history of Ganondorf and castles, They hover in the air. So what if there's this emphasis on sky travel and they expand upon the open air concept in Breath of the Wild 2, and there's more of a need to explore the sky? If there is, then maybe Nintendo's going to want to add some sort of sky mount. In come the Loftwings, which makes a lot of sense when we sort of think about kind of the theme of this podcast, the Nintendo's lead up to E3 2021 and also potentially Breath of the Wild 2, which could be the star of their show. They may be using Skyward Sword HD to sort of like set a bit more context for Breath of the Wild 2. Show off the Loftwings if they are going to be something that's going to be in Breath of the Wild 2, right? But also give us more lore about the history of Zelda. Hence why they've been sort of telling us about Link and Zelda and probably Ganondorf or Groose soon. Maybe not Ganondorf, he's not in Skyward Sword, but you know, maybe Demise. Or at least Groose. But they still like were sharing out the Zelda lore. They like when they on the day that they announced the Skyward Sword HD amiibo, they put out a link to a website from Nintendo that was just detailing all of like the Zelda lore and timeline. Nintendo doesn't normally do that. So it really feels like they're using Skyward Sword to sort of build up that lore and background for a lot of the newer Zelda fans that are out there now because of Breath of the Wild. And this is all sort of prep and a lead up to Breath of the Wild 2.
I love that idea, but I'm gonna let the other guys have this one for now. I've been talking a lot.
I don't even know how to start, honestly. I could, my brain's trying to think about what that would look like in the game, right? Like what exactly in the air would need, what could they do in the air to make something like that be useful, right? Because like with the Wolf Link amiibo, it's just a pet essentially that just travels around with you and attacks things. That's not that hard. We already know you're gonna be walking around. That's a normal thing you're gonna be doing in Breath of the Wild all the time. But in the air, the only thing I remember specifically being in the air in Breath of the Wild was the Master Mode platforms with the octo balloons.
Yeah.
And other than that, I don't know what else. So I like the idea, but I'm so curious as to like what they can do to the game to make that a useful thing to have. And also, would the Loftwing be the only flying mount? Because if they're gonna have other things in the air to make the Loftwing make sense, there would also have to be mounts in Breath of the Wild 2 that aren't Loftwings.
Dragons.
So
dragons.
What would that look like?
Bring back the dragons. Bring back the dragons. Maybe like did you ever think it was weird how like he couldn't actually like walk on the dragons? Like what if like if we're gonna be back in Breath of the Wild 2, I feel like they're not gonna just not bring back the dragons, right? Like the three dragons, they're gonna bring them back. But I feel like they're not gonna just copy and paste them in and they're gonna be the exact same. They're gonna have a different role, So what if there's something to that? What if maybe you don't ride them, but maybe they become like their own platforms or something, or maybe there's some sort of quest related to them in some way. But just kind of going back to what you're sort of questioning, Shifty, like some of the ideas I have for how they can sort of expand to the air is one, bring back Skyloft. But obviously, what is Skyloft now? Because not everything fell to the ground, right? Or did it? So there's that. But also in Twilight Princess, there's a city in the sky. What if that's one of the dungeons, they revisit that dungeon in Breath of the Wild, right? So you can have a city in the sky, you can have Skyloft, all of a sudden you have two different cities in the sky, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's this other race, I forgot the name of them, the chicken people.
The
Oku.
The Oku. Yeah.
Oku.
So I was always confused about how to pronounce that, right? Because it was like
I
two
still
O's,
don't
a
know.
C and two O's, right? The Oku
It's
or
very weird.
something like that. The chicken people. Let's just call it
The
the chicken people.
The flying chicken people.
The flying chicken people who live in the sky. Like, I find it hard to believe that there won't be new species and races in Breath of the Wild 2. I feel like there's going to be more. So seeing them, it's a whole other community they could sort of integrate there. And maybe there could still be some people from the old Skyloft that never came back to the ground. Like, what if there's a whole other civilization that we didn't get to see? And when you think about the dragons, like, whenever you would, like, shoot them, they would fly, and there'd be, like, these portals that would create, and they would just sort of disappear. Like, what if there's just, like, a whole other atmosphere that you have to penetrate, and it's a whole other realm, which is where maybe Ganondorf is taking the Hyrule Castle. And with that rising, there could theoretically be other pieces of land that rise from the ground, too, right? Causing this seismic shifts.
Oh, yeah.
Things are breaking apart. things are opening up, old dungeons may be revealed, caverns are being revealed, but then also more islands are rising to the sky. Maybe it's not just Hyrule Castle. This is full-blown speculation mode, right? I'm trying to run through my logic here. If you think it makes sense, agree with me, fine. If you don't agree, that's totally fine too. But I'm just saying, there's definitely ways that they could sort of expand the sky and make it this whole other like realm to explore.
You know,
Dude, I think I'm gonna have to make a new Zelda theory video soon.
you know, something that came to mind while you were talking was that what if they, like we were talking about Skyward Sword earlier, right? When they have the owl statues all over the place, and then we have the amiibo that lets you do it wherever, right?
Yeah.
So what if the amiibo works fundamentally the same, but in Breath of the Wild 2, but in Breath of the Wild 2, maybe the dragons have specific places where you go there and you could jump onto the dragon and be able to ride that path that the dragon typically would take. Then that could be like a drop-off point at any point.
Okay.
Or maybe you can go to Rito Village and there's a Rito that you could ride off of. Or someone who wants to like help out Link for whatever reason or another. And the amiibo could basically just be that feature without like the Skyward Sword owl statue situation. It's that same feature, but anywhere with a Loftwing.
Yeah, that's
I
possible.
think it would be poetic. I think it would be poetic because, you know, Breath of the Wild was kind of like marketed as an open air game, but for a game that was open air, there wasn't really that much to do in the air. There were barely any airborne enemies. Like the only, like Shifty said, you only had the platforms in master mode, kind of, and then of course one of the divine beasts was airborne, but that was like its own closed off section.
Yeah.
There really you could sail around, but all the action took place on the ground, like most of it at least. And everybody's been talking about underground because of the trailer and stuff. But I could definitely see something like that happening, especially now that you mention it with the whole Skyloft, the amiibo of the Loftwing Amiibo that could play into that in some way. We already had a motorcycle, so in the previous game, that kind of already broke the land traversal. So and the paraglider cannot ascend; it can only slowly descend.
Right. From
so it would
peaks.
be
yeah.
So it would definitely be an amazing addition to increase the air mobility, but also have complete gameplay stuff surrounding that. And like you said, you have the castle rising. Maybe that's not the only part of Hyrule that rises up. Like maybe whole chunks of Earth all around Hyrule are lifting up off of the ground.
And when you think of it that way, right, it kind of reminds you of like Xenoblade X, where there's just islands in the sky, right? Monolith Soft has a lot of experience with creating floating like terrain. I don't. They definitely have the staff to make a world like that.
For sure, yeah. And I feel like in Skyward Sword they didn't really like the whole idea with the sky was very underdeveloped in my opinion. They didn't really do much with the whole floating island stuff. It was painfully small. There was only like a handful of islands. There wasn't much to do on those islands. So I can definitely see them expanding on that and making it a lot better than that.
Yeah. And the thing about Skyward Sword, when I played it, as much as I enjoyed the game, and I know I'm not alone in feeling this way, but there was like this strong urge for it to be open. Like I never wanted to just go through this portal that took me to the ground. I wanted to be able to fly seamlessly to the ground and back up again, right? Like there was, it sort of like teased you about the promise of a fully open world or open air Zelda game, and now that Nintendo's finally achieved that, and since they've revisited Skyward Sword, maybe they'll finally make good on that sort of promise or that sort of tease they put with Skyward Sword, and this time around it's full sky and ground traversal.
Yeah, and it would also be very fitting since Skyward Sword is by far the most connected game to Breath of the Wild. Like of all the other 3D Zelda games, Skyward Sword has the most references in the lore of it. You know, you have
the Forgotten Temple.
Yeah, you have the Forgotten Temple. You have the 3 springs, which are almost identically, like really they're in a ruined state, of course, but they're almost identical to it. You have Fi in the sword, who you can actually hear.
Breath of the Wild 2 is actually Skyward Sword 3.
Yeah, in some ways. Even the three dragons you were referring to, those are also based on Skyward Sword.
Interesting point. And there's also the statues. The goddess statues are everywhere. And they're
Yeah, the Hylia statue.
very
Yeah.
similar. Very similar design.
Like, even like I remember when Twilight Princess came out, Twilight Princess HD, they were like, yeah, you're gonna want to play this game because you're gonna have a little bit of a, oh, I see feeling when you play Breath of the Wild. But I didn't really see it. There really wasn't that much, well, except for Wolflink. There wasn't really that much lore implications, or like lore connections with Twilight Princess.
It
But
feels
Skyward
like-
Sword is everywhere.
What's gonna be funny is that I feel like with the sequel it might be the opposite way, right? Because like when you look at
Yeah.
the sequel trailer, that Ganondorf is pretty, in my opinion, very clearly the Ganondorf from Twilight Princess, right? With the hole and the gem, and then yeah, to your point, Skyward Sword seems to be greatly alluded to in Breath of the Wild.
Yeah. So, man, I'm liking this idea.
There is
Oh.
there's probably a few different counter arguments here, but one counter argument that comes to mind, and this is a silly one, but I'm just kind of curious what you guys think of this. The Loftwings, you could argue, evolved into the current Rito in Breath of the Wild. Because those Rito are they don't look like the same Rito from Wind Waker, you know? And I know the Rito were supposed to have evolved from the Zora, yet you still have Zora in Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't really consider that to be too strong of a counter argument I don't really feel like the amiibos are really thought of as like canon.
No.
Like
I
pieces
mean,
of-
Wolflink is definitely.
I just meant the Rito,
non-existent.
the Rito in Breath of the Wild compared to just Loftwings from Skyward Sword. Like their similarity, like if you were to bring back Loftwings, would it just be bigger Rito that you can fly? Like, you know,
I
that's
think
the
they
perspective
would-
I'm getting
I
at here.
think
But
for
I
the
don't entirely agree.
Amiibo-
Go on.
I think for the amiibo you can have the Loftwing, but I don't think Loftwing would be like the flying creature if they wanted to have like a flying creature in the game normally. I don't think they would use Loftwings. I think they would use some other sort of winged creature, maybe even just a whole new thing.
Right, yeah, I have to agree with that because I feel like the ideas I mentioned earlier about using the dragons or maybe someone from Rito Village maybe wants to help out Link and you fly with them. I feel like they would have another way of doing it without having the Loftwing. Like having the Loftwing is basically the benefit of the amiibo itself, other than being able to fly from wherever you are.
When I suggested the amiibo, what I was thinking was that it was kind of like how I think you can scan in an amiibo to get Link's horse. You can get Epona into Breath of the Wild. So my thinking was the Loftwing amiibo would be Link's Loftwing, the Crimson Loftwing, into Breath of the Wild too, like kind of like that. But there's still other other Loftwings. But again, you know, it could be your idea where it's just a Loftwing, right? And there's something else in Breath of the Wild too that is the air transportation.
Well, you could also have a since it deals a lot with technology, you can have a ancient flying machine to traverse the sky.
Could be flying saucers. They played around.
Like I said,
with
we already also that,
Yeah.
but we also had the like I said before, we had the motorcycle, which was also Chica technology. So who's to say?
Yeah.
And in one of the laboratories in Breath of the Wild, you can actually see like a sort of a prototype of a flying creature, like in the form of like a Chica robot, basically. And nobody's ever been able to confirm what that thing really is. So maybe they were like experimenting with like technology to be able to fly. And like you said, maybe the Loftwing could just as well be a like a non-canon inclusion to the game. Like if you like Epona, like obviously Epona is not canon. There's no way the same horse from Ocarina of Time could have survived all this time, or from Twilight Princess. Same with Wolflink. There's no way that Wolflink can canonically be in that game. Like he's an ancient hero who probably already died, like who knows, tens of thousands of years ago.
Who doesn't have the ability to transform into wolf anymore after the events of the game. So it's like, from like a small period of time, right?
Yeah, so it could very well be, like you said, like a little extra they put into the game instead of that flying machine or whatever you have to traverse the sky. You have a Loftwing, and it's not necessarily probably the red one, the one from the Crimson Loftwing, since that's the most recognizable one.
Yeah,
probably just be a way to get flying earlier, like because you probably have to like unlock it or find a way to do it, and then you can just get it right away, and you get like a cooler looking or a unique looking way to do it.
So
there's one thing I will say about the Amiibo functionality in general is there's one difference compared to the Wolflink Amiibo is when the Wolflink Amiibo was announced, we knew immediately that it would do something in Breath of the Wild. We didn't know what it was. They didn't tell us what it was, but they did tell us immediately that it would do something in Breath of the Wild, which they didn't do at all for this one, which isn't really like confirm it. It's just like another little point.
Yeah. I also feel like when you go back to the Wii U era, like Nintendo didn't have as much going on. So they always need to think of things to sort of get fans excited, right? Like Breath of the Wild was the only thing they had for all of E3 in 2016, right? Like it's not going to be that way this time around. It's an entirely different time. So, because of that, Nintendo's messaging and marketing may be very different. But it also could be the case that maybe there is no functionality, right? Like maybe we could be going off the deep end with speculation here. Like we don't know. But I just still feel like there is like that potential.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. But I do want to sort of go more into a lore direction for Breath of the Wild 2 here, right? So, and by the way, guys, if you guys want to do like more questions and stuff, when we're sort of done, like kind of talking all things out, we'll transition to more Q&A to close out the podcast, okay? But I want to present this idea to you guys, right? So we're already talking about how maybe there is a lot of things in the sky in Breath of the Wild 2, right? Well, let's think about like the potential progression of the game. I feel like there's a decent chance that with that rising castle, it's going to become Ganon's new tower, right? And it's going to get high up into the air, and we may not be able to access it from the beginning the same way we were able to in Breath of the Wild. It may be like the goal. And it's so high up in the air that we can't quite reach it. And basically, perhaps the point of the game is to explore this new version of Hyrule with all the changes that's been happening and gain access in some way, somehow, right? Maybe there's like layers to the sky, and like you have to explore underground, do these different trials, do these different dungeons. Hello, kitten. And you're continually getting more power and abilities that get you closer and closer to the eventual Hyrule Castle, where Ganondorf is doing some crazy stuff to take over the world. Basically, think of it as like, instead of trying to an entire game built around building like climbing a mountain, it's like the entire game turns into like this giant, you're trying to get to space almost. Not space itself, but like once you get that high up, it's almost space-like. Which is interesting because maybe they could go back to like the UFOs and things of that nature, really maybe bring in some more alien elements the higher up you get.
That would be cool. Ganondorf in space.
If you can't defeat Link on land.
I mean, when we think about that, like Aonuma's already kind of hinted at the fact that they want to revisit this world, but we still don't really know what that means.
Right.
And in that regard, there's only really two ways to go. Three maybe. Either they add a whole new province, which is almost as big as the entire world, which I don't really see happening. That would take that wouldn't really add too much new stuff to the game. It's just another place you haven't been yet to walk around and do the exact same things as in Breath of the Wild. So you can go up or down. So we already have so many underground theories about, there's going to be underground cities. But like you said, could also be up in the sky and maybe underwater. They also need to add underwater swimming mechanics.
Yeah, I mean, they could conceivably just go to a different part of Hyrule that we've never explored before and do that, right? Like, I guess. But I'll tell you, I'll be a little disappointed because I kind of want to see how Hyrule's progressed, right? Like, I'd be disappointed if we don't get to see Hyrule again. But there's something I've been sort of thinking about, though. Like, how many games and their direct sequels allow us to explore the exact same area, you know, but obviously it's repurposed. Like, usually when you have a sequel, you go somewhere else. You don't explore the exact same land. I'm trying to think of one. It also gets me thinking, like, every time we get a new Zelda game, it's pretty much almost always in Hyrule, yet they just reimagine Hyrule every single time, so it's like a different game. It's just kind of a weird
this is
thing.
a first.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder how it's going to be handled, because I'm trying to think of another example in, like, gaming where you explore the exact same place in a direct sequel.
Closest thing I could think of is, I mean, we were talking about this earlier, but A Link Between Worlds is basically the same map as Link to the Past.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
Yeah, but at the same
Good
time,
example.
it's an entirely different visual style. It's years later, you know, so it's a little different, right? Because you can argue like A Link to the Past is almost like just playing through like the original Legend of Zelda, but it's entirely different graphical style.
Yeah.
But imagine like a similar graphical style, that's a direct story sequel, same characters. Like, when have we ever seen that before?
Harry Potter. Go back to Hogwarts every time.
That's a good point. Yeah.
No, but yeah, it doesn't really happen even in other games.
Yakuza have like, I think, am I thinking of Yakuza has the same like city that you go to in, like several of the games, or is that a different series?
I haven't played it, so I'm not sure.
It might be Yakuza. I've only really played 3 Yakuza games so far.
And were they all in the same town?
I think all the
I think they were. I'm not sure. I don't remember. I know Zero had like 2 different locations, and I think one of them, the one with Kiryu, was like used in other games. I could be wrong. But I mean,
the fact that we have to think about this so much already speaks volumes.
It's not a common occurrence.
Right.
We can agree on that.
Yeah, it's not a common occurrence.
It's not common. They could also, because I remember for a long time, a lot of people thought that this game would be out quicker than it really is right now, because a lot of people said, you know, they would reuse assets, reuse the map, so it wouldn't take as long. But we're still, like, there's a good amount of time since Breath of the Wild, the first game, came out, right?
Oh yeah.
So they're clearly putting in more work than people expected them to. So what if they're not just doing air or underground? What if they're attempting to do both?
I feel like, yeah. I mean, I think it's... My brain's just assuming everything. I'm assuming they're going to expand lengthwise and width. Like, it's just, we're going to go beyond the normal margins of the map. But also, we're going to go far down. We're going to go far up. We're going to go underwater. There might even be like a second realm like Twilight or the Dark World.
I mean, I'm sure we would. I'm sure as Zelda fans, we would all want all of these things to be happening simultaneously. But the castle going up could go either way. Like, it could be like a sky thing, it could be an underground thing, but it could also just be an opportunity for them to do both, where it could just be a situation where, hey, you could check out the giant, massive underground cave, where you could go on your Loftwing if you have the Amiibo and just fly all over Hyrule. I could also see a situation where, just like how kind of like the Great Plateau in the beginning of Breath of the Wild was kind of like you had to do all these things to get off, unless you're a speedrunner and you know how to do that. I could see a situation being similar with the castle, but on the opposite side, where instead of the castle being something you can access from like day one, it's something that, hey, you could technically access that any time, but you need to learn how to be able to get up that high, which is maybe you learn how to fly. Maybe if you're a speedrunner, maybe you would throw yourself onto a tree and just fly up there that way. But there'll be like a million different ways, but technically it won't stop you from doing so, you know? Like, and I think that's important for them to keep in the game. Like, Breath of the Wild, a big selling point I remember was the fact that you can just go to Ganon like immediately when you start up the game. And I think that's something I personally love about the game as well.
Well, if there's this Loftwing unlock, maybe that's one of the ways that you can
that would be...
get up there like easy.
Right, yeah.
Like you read about or you hear about a rumor about there used to be these ancient birds that used to roam the sky, and you have to go find one of them. See if you can still find one that's alive.
Yeah, like that's very exciting to me though. Like, sure, maybe like what if there are Loftwings aren't actually extinct, right? Like what if there are a few of them in Hyrule, but they're super, super rare. They're one of those few species that, or maybe there's a number of species that return to Hyrule, since the Calamity Ganon is gone, right? Like, you have to imagine that the Calamity caused a lot of people and perhaps animals to leave Hyrule. But with the Calamity repelled temporarily, right, we see the rebuilding of civilizations, the returning of some different races, but also the returning of different creatures. Perhaps one of those are the Loftwings, right? Like, maybe we see them in Hyrule. This is a much bigger version of Hyrule than ever before. Like, there is opportunity to find, like, really rare things deep in there, and that's very exciting. Like, I remember when Breath of the Wild came out and I heard that there were dragons, I was like, oh my god, I don't need there to be a lot, just the fact that there's just a few there and they're super rare and you might not see them even if you play for hours, but you can find them, that's super cool. Like, I would love for there to be more things like that. So if there are a few rare Loftwings or some other sort of crazy ancient bird that you can find and maybe it's really hard to capture once you have one, there it is. Like, I want more of that. Like, another example, the Lynels. There's not a lot of them, right? Like, if you're playing Breath of the Wild, there's a good chance you might not run to end to any for a very long time, right? Unless you follow, like, the story or you go to certain places. Like, it'd be really cool if they add more things like that, like more really rare events or enemies or creatures. And it just kind of adds more to the mystique of the overall world, right? Like, for example, I mean, there's a lot of like little things that are already in Breath of the Wild that are really exciting, like the Guardian of the Mountain, right? Like, I want more unique or very rare occurrences, but there's so many of them that everyone's bound to run into a few, and it just kind of makes your adventure like that more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do want something like that. I'm not sure if they would do it with something like a Loftwing or not, but
Something.
I mean, I don't know, because I could see the Loftwing being something you could find, and then but they won't let you keep it. Kind of like the Guardian of the Forest, you know?
Maybe.
Well, like, you can have it, but
can't tame it.
I don't know. But then again, there's Ganon's horse, right? So I'm not really sure about that either.
Yeah,
thinking about it.
Well, there also wouldn't be any stables. I would assume for Loftwings. So, you know, maybe you're right.
Yeah,
and it's more of a temporary thing.
Sky stables.
Yeah,
you could just be Beetle with a big shop with the propeller going on, you know? Just have
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's a good example. Yeah.
Well, it could be a couple of years, right? So maybe, you know, over those couple of years, some new animals migrate back to Hyrule. We do see maybe some evidence of that. Like, for example, like we see like that weird bison-like creature, right? Like, that wasn't in the original Breath of the Wild. So maybe there is something, just the idea of some creatures sort of coming back or migrating back to Hyrule since the Calamity has been gone. And maybe the people have rebuilt civilization, but also some of these people have taken up new jobs or taken up new activities to take advantage of it, right? Like, maybe there are new sky stables because there are Loftwings now. They exist, and there's some people trying to take advantage of it like a business.
I think for sure the fact that this is a direct sequel, obviously, usually sequels try to one up the previous one.
Yeah.
But in this case, in this case, there isn't really much to one up because let's just put it that way, that like there's not a lot they can add to it that would make it better. But they could add a lot to it that made it so different that it's a completely new type of game, which could be better than than its prequel. Because we've already seen in the trailer kind of that there's not going to be any shrines and towers in the game.
Right.
Like, they kind of removed those from the map, and for good reason. You know, they cannot like explain another 150 of those things being around Hyrule. Plus, I think the shrines have overstayed their welcome at this point because it was very telegraphed. Like, at some point, you always knew what you were gonna find. No matter what you saw in the distance, or like 9 times out of 10, it was like whatever mystery it is that you were solving, you knew it was gonna lead to a shrine at some point. Like, in most cases, and that's one of the things that you mentioned pretty early in the stream, like those big caves where you don't know what to expect. But like in Breath of the Wild, if you blow up a rock, like one of those that's like against one of the walls, it's always just a shallow incline with a chest inside. It was never like, oh wow, there's a whole cave behind here. Well, let's see where this goes. You know, like in Twilight Princess, those huge caves that you could explore. I want to see more of that kind of stuff too. And mysteries on the water, and I don't always want it to lead to a shrine, like the same reward every time. That would be good. And that's also a way they could bring in the original, more bigger dungeon types. Because if you're not going to have 150 shrine, you better at least have like around 8 bigger dungeons to like with more of their own personality, not all with the Sheikah technology and stuff.
I actually really like that idea, especially if it's just woven into the world without any kind of like, because like the shrines is like the one thing in Breath of the Wild where you have to go into like a separate loading screen and then you end up in the shrine like room.
Yeah.
So if it's like woven perfectly into the map, the cave is actually just there and it doesn't have to load up a whole other instance for it to work. I think I would have actually really liked that, especially if you kind of take that idea and then add in what Andre said about like rare creatures being out there. You can have like this sort of secret cave that doesn't lead into a shrine, and that's where you discover maybe an injured Loftwing, and maybe you have to find something to, bring it back to health and be able to get it out of the cave so you can actually go flying around with it.
That'd be awesome.
Right.
Yeah. We've touched on this before, but like imagine if they recreate the Forest Temple with the Breath of the Wild engine, right? Like, because of the openness of the game, there'd be more than a way to sort of go about exploring this dungeon, right? And imagine how they would redesign major dungeons, in this style of game. Like, it'd be different. It wouldn't be necessarily just one way to go about entering it, which I think would be really cool, especially if it's like these old, run-down, ancient places. Like, another interesting thing about what they could do here, right, is that they have the opportunity to give us a Hyrule that we've never seen before. Like, I guess with Breath of the Wild, it was a Hyrule that was devastated. And it's not to say the game wasn't magical, but you also got this sense that the previous World of Hyrule had a lot in it, and a lot of it was gone, So it'd be interesting to see Nintendo bring back, or the Zelda team bring back Hyrule, but it's a new Hyrule, or a more denser Hyrule with more there, more to find, more interesting secrets and things. And as you're exploring, maybe this time around you do finally find a Forest Temple, because where is the forest, fire, and spirit temples in Breath of the Wild? They're not there, right? Like, most things in the entire Zelda mythos are at least in some way referenced in Breath of the Wild, but the main dungeons that we've seen repeated throughout different Zelda games, they're just not there. Where are they? I would love to see them sort of show where they were, and us have the discovery of finding them, and then like, oh, I remember this from previous game, but obviously it's different now because it's Breath of the Wild too, and just kind of thinking about how do I go about exploring this recreated dungeon in this game. Like, there's just so much potential with what they could do with expanding different things, be it like caves and caverns and other mini dungeons that are already there that you can sort of just openly get into, as opposed to like separated like loading screens.
Yeah, I think they may have, even though I absolutely love Breath of the Wild to death, I think they may have overcorrected on some things. Like, I also want progression items to come back to some degree.
Yeah.
Like, on the one hand, I get it. They wanted to give you everything you needed so you could explore Hyrule at your own pace and to your heart's content without being stuck. But that's not going to work a second time, because we've already explored this world extensively. So you want to at least have some restrictions to that. Like, you cannot just enter any... you got the Sheikah Slate, and they immediately gave you all the runes you need to solve every puzzle in the game. You're never going to get stuck, ever, because that was kind of the point of that game. Every shrine can be solved once you enter it. There's never going to be a situation where you enter a shrine and you're like, oh, I don't have this specific item, so I have to go back out and try again later or something. But of course, the Sheikah Slate, we don't even know if it's going to come back in the new game.
Yeah, it's not carrying it.
Yeah, we see some things going on with Link's hand, which from the concept art kind of looks like it might serve a purpose where it can be also kind of like a multi-tool, like multifunctional, like it can transform into different weapons or items or stuff like that. And that's a way you can bring back the progression items again. You don't give the player everything they need, every power that hand can do right at the start. You have to, go a little bit back to the old formula, just to see like like I said, they may have overcorrected some aspects of the Zelda formula. Like they had been doing the same thing since Ocarina of Time, all the way up until Skyward Sword. Yeah, Skyward Sword did have motion controls, but the overall gameplay wasn't that different. It was you were still doing dungeons. Halfway through the dungeon, you get your progression item, and that's it. And you go fight the boss. And like it's a formula that's been perfected over so many decades now. And with Breath of the Wild, they were like, all right, if we're going to keep doing this for 10 more years, it's going to get stale and people are going to get tired of Zelda. So we have to try something completely new, throw the whole formula out the window, see how much we can strip away without the game no longer feeling like a Zelda game. And some of those things I think they can bring back now.
Yeah, I would like to see them bring back some of those things, but I guess the other thing is that, like, if they bring back, like, the hook shot, for example, right, that doesn't mean it's going to feel like old Zelda, right? It's going to feel like somewhere in the middle, like, because it's going to still be in the open-air style, and the challenges and gameplay opportunities that offers are different, right? It's going to offer different sort of, like, opportunities to play with the hook shot. Like, imagine having a hook shot that can just grapple onto different parts of a mountain. Like, what that's going to do is just going to speed up your gameplay significantly, right? And there's room to improve that hook shot significantly. Like, maybe at first it only has a certain range. Maybe it can only grapple onto certain pieces of terrain, right? But then after a certain while, it can just grab onto anything, really. And then all of a sudden you can go almost anywhere. And then you get maybe a long shot, right, where you can reach even farther off distances. And before you know it, you're just zipping around, like, mountain to mountain, like some, I don't even... I've never seen anything do like a Spider-Man, sure, but instead of it being building to building, we're talking about mountain to mountain, which is a whole other scale. Like, they could conceivably do something like that, right? Like, they can take these items, bring them back into Breath of the Wild, but it's going to be an entirely new experience, even though it's kind of bringing back some of the old Zelda style sort of mechanics.
Yeah, I can also see the entire map being designed around that too, other than just having the items there, right?
Yeah.
Like, if we have, like, these sky platforms again and this whole sky theme to the game, having, like, the double hook shots, like what Twilight Princess had. Like, if you had double hook shots, you could be flying from platform to platform or from mount to mount if there's multiple birds up in the air for some reason. There's a lot of things you can do with it. I just wonder if they are open to having the game follow the, because, like, if you bring these items back in a way that's kind of bringing back, like, having, like, a structured, like, amount, like, which dungeon you do after another, like an order, unless they have them all, like, out there and you just have to find them, which I think I would prefer if that were the case, because I agree that they shouldn't necessarily get them first so that way we can get it like an older Zelda style to it, but at the same time I do really like having the open freedom of that Breath of the Wild had. And I mean, they will still have that, but I think having them be available in some capacity where you can just get them in any order would be a good middle ground.
Yeah, I mean, well, like, what if they were to sort of Metroidvania the game a little bit? Like, yeah, that would block, the Metroidvania style gameplay inherently blocks certain things off, right? Like, so you do lose, I guess, a degree of openness in that way. But I'll tell you that, and it kind of goes against what you would like, Shifty, because you want to be able to access the end from the very beginning. That's kind of a unique thing for Breath of the Wild, right? Like, not many games can do that. But I think when you do that, you also lose some things. There's a balance, right? Like, you can't really have everything. But, like, I feel like it would also bode well for the story if there was some level of linearity. And it's not to say the world isn't open, right? And there isn't a lot you can do and explore, but they do have put in some sort of structure in terms of how you go about exploring it. Maybe you still can... Maybe there's, like, a few key items that you don't have in the beginning of the game. They give you some, kind of like what they do with the runes, but there is some level of progression that you have to establish. Like, maybe you do have to get, like, a hook shot. Maybe you do have to get, like, the Dominion Rod, right? And maybe there's, like, another special item they add. And there's some segmentation to the game. And each time you get each item, it opens up the game more and more. Like, the game starts off extremely open still. You can still pretty much explore everything. But there are certain things that are either really hard to do without the item or impossible. so it's not entirely accessible everywhere, but each item you get just opens up another layer of exploration, right? Which is why I was kind of alluding to the idea of you have access to the land, but to get higher up into the sky, you need to sort of build yourself up in some way, which kind of, you know, maybe every main dungeon you go to gives you another way to kind of explore the sky that lets you get even further up there, which eventually allows you to get to Hyrule Castle, or now Ganondorf's Castle, where you fight him off. And I just want to point this one thing out. There's a chance that Ganondorf takes Zelda and she gets kidnapped again, and the castle rises up to almost space, and Link's like, oh shit, here we go again. Like, there's a really good chance that happens. I don't want that to happen, but it's also one of those things where, like, if she's not abducted, she's not kidnapped, how does that affect the game? Like, will she just be at a certain point that you interact with her like an NPC, right? Will she be a companion character, and how will that impact the entire gameplay of the game? Will it be co-op where you choose one or the other? Like, there's different things. I'm personally not thinking that they'll do like straight up co-op, straight up like one or the other, because Zelda has her strengths and weaknesses, Link has his strengths and weaknesses. Like, if you were to just pick one and leave the other alone, you wouldn't be able to do everything. Like, Zelda, she has powers, but she can't use them in Breath of the Wild 2. Like, at the end of Breath of the Wild, she loses them. I feel like throughout Breath of the Wild 2, she may gain them slowly, and maybe that's kind of part of the progression of the game, her powers. But she's more of a researcher, right? She's more of an intellectual. So she's not going to be someone that's going to pull out a sword and duke it out with a Lionel, right? That's not her character, at least. Like, she is not a trained warrior. Meanwhile, Link is, but he's also not much of a talker, right? Maybe he talks a little bit in Breath of the Wild too. Maybe that would be a crazy thing, but you know, they each have different roles, is my point. So it would be weird to see it just be like pick one and explore the game with that. So it's either A, Zelda gets abducted, or B, she's an NPC you interact with and there's no stakes there, or C, she's a companion character of some sort.
I wonder if she could be like a fairy character, where you could call her like over your Sheikah tablet at any time and have her like talk to you or give you hints, or like have her like scan something and give her thoughts on it or something like that.
And maybe she just at one, like maybe she's in like New Castle Town, where she's just leading the efforts of restoration and figuring out what the hell happened to the castle, and you just go back to her throughout the game, and she does do what you're saying, and she offers you advice. You kind of have like a constant connection with her. That's one option.
I guess another option would be if they, because you guys mentioned that Link does not have the Sheikah slate. What if it's a situation where Link gets the green hand, and that green hand gives him some kind of different set of powers, but then if Zelda's playable, she gets the powers that we're familiar with the runes and the Sheikah slate and all that.
Maybe. I think they would need some way to switch between them very quickly, though, because I feel like it'd be very tedious if you had to like go and switch, like go to a certain place to switch back and forth to do things. I think it would kind of go against the entire gameplay flow of Breath of the Wild if they did that, and I'm not sure how they would have like Zelda like following you either. I'm not sure how that would work, because then there's an inherent lag to how fast she can keep up with you and how good the AI controlling her actually like keeps up with what you're doing.
I don't really see that. I don't really see that in the Zelda game, you know. I already found that kind of immersion breaking in Xenoblade, where your companions are all just falling to the death of a cliff because you're standing too close to the edge. It's hard to program that kind of stuff.
But maybe that's part of the reason they're taking so long. Like, maybe they're trying to come up with some sort of like amazing AI for just one character. I feel like you build a game around that's not that far-fetched. Like, for example, we kind of have that in God of War. Kratos and his son explore the entire game together. They platform together, they fight together, they slowly build up combos together. Like, it's kind of been done before, actually. So, you know. Yeah,
but God of War was very more restrictive, like though.
Yeah, it's more of a linear. It's not an open world game.
Yeah.
So
like in an open world game, you're gonna either have that Xenoblade effect where your AI of your party members is just gonna be awkward, and
She's gonna get
would that
abducted.
work with paragliding and some of the other stuff? I think if I had to guess, they're either gonna go just completely go back to the roots, like everybody's now speculating, of course, about, because we saw both of them in the trailer. It could be that they are like, it doesn't mean anything. It's just another cutscene like that it was in Breath of the Wild, and Zelda's just gonna be kidnapped again or something. I'm expecting either that they're just gonna go full old school again and damsel in distress, or they're gonna make her playable, but then you would have to be able to switch between the two rapidly or quickly in some way. Like, because like you said, they both have different strengths. You cannot take on a Lionel with Zelda. That would be very out of character for her, unless she has her powers, of course, then she could. But it is a possibility. It could be that Age of Calamity kind of led us into this idea of playing as Zelda, which is, well, yeah, it's a cool idea. I definitely liked her as a fighter in Breath of the Wild, seeing her do something more than just complain.
Yeah.
So
just looking at the chat here, well, first of all, there's a super Taker provided a super chat. I'm gonna get to that in a moment. Just a couple things here. Nishant Kelkar added me, I'm joining a little late, but it's great to see MonsterMaze here. Yeah, MonsterMaze is awesome. Birdman, I think Link's green hand will absorb the slate's powers and make a totally new mechanic so that Link can use it in game. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's kind of shifty, like what you were talking about, right? Like, it could be like the replacement, and maybe Zelda gets the runes. One idea I've had is that because she's lost her powers, I wonder if she is, like, not abducted, like maybe throughout the progression of the game, she slowly builds up her powers, right? That would be nice to see. And it also, if there is, like, this theme of this time around, then the Zelda team does everything that we wanted to see in Skyward Sword, but in Breath of the Wild too. That'd be pretty cool. Because we were already talking about like maybe open air sky exploration, right? Then seamlessly with the ground and all, kind of like what we wanted in Skyward Sword. But another thing that I wanted, at least, that was sort of teased, was Zelda exploring the whole land in Skyward Sword, right? And we know she's exploring with Impa. We don't know what really happens in between, but in the ending credits, they show you a whole bunch of cutscenes of Zelda and Impa exploring the land together, right? So it kind of plays around with that idea of Zelda exploring Hyrule. So what if they make good on several sort of teases they had in Skyward Sword with Breath of the Wild too, and we do see Zelda sort of explore the land into some capacity, and Link is her companion. Like, it sounds like a really crazy thing to do, but if you want to make Zelda different, and if the Zelda team wants to do something new, maybe they do come up with some sort of innovative AI companion combo mechanic system between the both of them. Like, I don't think it's impossible. I just think it's like nearly impossible. Kind of like getting traditional controls in Skyward Sword. Actually, probably harder than that, but
They would probably have to go. Like, one thing I definitely don't see is them forcing you to play as one character because of a mission structure. Like, Zelda has to go here, but she has to go alone, and you have to play like a whole chunk of the game as her. That takes away any free choice on the side of the player, and we know that Nintendo is not really about that. They want to give you that freedom to choose and to do whatever you want. It would go completely against the philosophy of the first game of Breath of the Wild.
Right.
So I don't see that happening. You would have to be able, like, even in Age of Calamity, even if it really didn't fit the narrative, you could still play as that character, even though that character shouldn't technically be there, but they still allowed it. Even there, they didn't want to take that choice away from you. If I want to play as Zelda the whole game, or as Link, I can, even though he's not supposed to be in that specific location at that time.
Yeah, this is a quick aside. Taker610 provided a super chat. Thank you very much, Taker. This question is related to Metroid. Where in the timeline is Metroid Prime versus Super Metroid? Well, there is a Metroid timeline, and basically you have Metroid Zero Mission first, I think, and then Metroid Prime, then Hunters, then Echoes, then Prime 3, and then after that you get Super Metroid. So it's after the the entire Prime series. But it would be interesting to see how Prime 4 relates to Super Metroid, like where on the timeline that falls. Like, is Super Metroid still after Prime 4? Does Prime 4 go beyond that? It'll be interesting to see for sure, but we probably won't be finding out too soon, but we'll see. Yeah, sorry to take away from the Zelda stuff, but I don't. It will be strange to see. It would be weird to have it segmented like that. Like, to your point, like Don, I do think they have to kind of keep that open nature of the game. So
they would have to keep things that go with the flow, with the original design of Breath of the Wild.
Yeah,
it's
so basically Zelda's getting abducted.
Most likely, unfortunately.
Honestly, I think she might end up just being like the queen of like. Just kind of like the authority figure there, because who else would it be? There's gonna probably be a lot more structure, like the Hyrule is gonna be building itself back up. There's gonna need to be some kind of authority, some kind of king, some kind of queen, and like who better to be that than Zelda?
Yeah, like maybe there's like we sort of touched on it already, but like maybe there's like a castle town and she is a leader of the reconstruction effort, right? And you have to kind of go back there, and then there you get more side quests and do different things like that, and you just kind of meet with her. My only issue with that is just like there is an element of like stakes when Zelda is captured, right? Like, so I do think Nintendo's going to want to think of something to increase the stakes here. Like if Ganondorf just takes the castle and you're like, oh, all right, well, I guess I'll just get to this castle whenever. Like, abducting Zelda is an easy way to kind of do it, right?
I don't really agree with that, because in Breath of the Wild, there's no real time stake either. It's like Zelda's like kind of somewhere in trouble, I guess, but like nobody ever acknowledges that. Nowhere in the game does time seem to progress towards an inevitable doom. Sure. It's just kind of like, I guess one day something bad might happen, so we might want to do something about this.
Let me ask you a question, though. Do you think
it is your goal?
Yeah, it is the goal. But do you think Breath of the Wild 2 will have a better story?
Yes, but hold on. Let me finish, because I wasn't actually done.
All right, go.
So I think just the most basic way probably to have this is, as the story progresses, Ganondorf becomes more and more reincarnated, because we see him, but he's like this zombie, like not super threatening, like looks like you could poke him with a stick and he'd fall and die, like Ganon. Like obviously it seems like there's gonna be some sort of resurrection process. So as he's, going back to life, actually becoming more and more like Ganondorf, becoming more and more of a threat, that can very easily be a actually much better way of having stakes. It's like, oh crap, it's like every dungeon I do, Ganondorf's becoming more and more awake, getting more and more power, and shit's going down now more and more as each one of these dungeons I'm clearing. And unlike the original Breath of the Wild, you actually feel like something bad might happen if you don't do something.
I got an idea.
Well, it was very sorry, Anders, go
yeah, so this is the idea. Okay, to your point, Brandon, like maybe that's where the stakes come from. It comes from, like, Link and Zelda are fine. They're working together in some way, right? Whether it's companionship or she's an NPC that you kind of go back and forth and talk to throughout, some sort of combination of like that, right? And the way they do the stakes is, to your point, like Ganondorf is just slowly getting stronger, resurrecting throughout the course of the game, right? I feel like it would be weird if you're like chasing Ganondorf throughout Hyrule Castle, or throughout Hyrule itself. So maybe he is just high up in the air and he has others kind of doing his bidding for him, helping him to sort of restore. So what if when Ganondorf resurrects, he's not the only one that resurrects? What if with the resurrection of Ganondorf, there are other dark ancient monsters that come back to life as well, and they are sources for evil that are littered throughout Hyrule that cause issues? Because this is a few years afterwards, hopefully, right? Maybe a couple years afterwards. So there's more people, there's more towns, right, that you can explore and do more side quests with, but they also start seeing the effects of some of these resurrected evil beings or things. Like, for example, look at the Leviathans. Like, what if they do something with that? Like, they're just bones in Breath of the Wild, but what if they're resurrected giant beasts that you have to deal with in Breath of the Wild too? Like, how cool would that be, right? Or like, what if we
Shadow of the Colossus style?
Shadow of the Colossus style, exactly.
Yeah.
Or like, for example, what if the ain't not no well I would love to see the ancient cistern. That'd be great to see. But what if, like, for example, the arbiter's ground, like we see the top of it in the desert, but what if that's unearthed and you go down there and you have to fight another giant bone demon dragon, or like something, like there's some sort of evil spirit you have to fight there, right? Or maybe at the forest temple that's unearthed as well, and you fight some sort of evil spirit there, and they're all like unique bosses, which is also saying I would love to see Breath of the Wild 2 unique bosses for the dungeons, because we only had like the scourges. But basically, I guess my point is that when Ganondorf resurrects, he doesn't resurrect just by himself. He resurrects with a crew, and this crew is devastating Hyrule. His posse, exactly, and you have to take them out little by little, and basically their job is just to
with the
help
homies.
him. Yeah, but
I do have to say,
go on.
I do have to say I'm kind of tired of the whole. There are much easier and more original ways to put up some stakes to motivate you to do what you want to do. It doesn't always have to be about saving a princess or saving a person. Case in point, Majora's Mask. It's the only Zelda game where you don't have to save anybody. Well, yeah, the whole world from for the world from Armageddon, but you're not specifically saving anybody. You're not. It's not again the same thing, because there's so many Zelda games that have that, where either in the Oracle games it's the Oracle of Ages and Seasons that get kidnapped, and in most games taking place in Hyrule it's Princess Zelda. It was such a fresh, like a breath of fresh air in Majora's Mask, that it wasn't about saving a specific person or something. It was literally like the doom is always there. It's hanging right there above you, and 3 days from now it's gonna crash, and you have to. If that's not a good motivator, I don't know what is.
I mean, you make a great point. Majora's Mask, I think, probably has the greatest stakes, right? Or it feels, yeah, it does. Like every tick is, but that a lot of that has to do with the time element. But if, like, to Brandon's point, there's a resurrecting Ganondorf. As we progress throughout Breath of the Wild 2, Ganondorf's getting stronger and stronger, and his influence is causing more and more havoc to the world. You'll feel more and more pressure to get the job done.
I think you could fuse a good amount of these ideas, because a lot of the ideas you guys are mentioning don't seem like they really counteract each other if you really think about it. Because you could have the whole storyline of Ganon getting stronger every time you beat a dungeon. Maybe there's some storyline reason why these dungeons were down here. Maybe originally they were supposed to help keep them in place, right? So maybe by defeating them you get stronger, but Ganon also gets stronger, right? And maybe at the same time the stakes are the fact that, like you, Andres, mentioned, right? We have Castletown there. Zelda's rebuilding, right? Where is Castletown located? Right under the floating castle. That could also be another reason why stakes are high, because everyone who lives there is right under the demon castle that's floating above their heads. You can have a lot of these ideas exist all at the same time, really. And in a similar way of having like items that sort of are in the game too, like going back to that previous conversation, that could also be intertwined with Castletown. Like maybe it's not necessarily in the dungeons like we're typically used to. Maybe they could have something like that in Link Between Worlds, where maybe depending on your Castletown, level or whatever the case would be, you have all these items available. And maybe at the same time, Castletown can also be the place where you repair things that are about to break. Maybe your items could break, and that's why you have to go back to Castletown, repair them, or maybe they don't break, or whatever the case may be, right? But Castletown could be the hub for a lot of these things, or maybe not even just Castletown, because Hyrule's bigger than just Castletown. But having stakes and having Ganondorf resurrected again and all these other things, they can all coexist. I think all of these are good ideas that can exist within, the floating castle motifs.
Yeah, but what's going to happen is that a few weeks from now, when we see Breath of the Wild 2, all these ideas are going to be wrong, and it's going to be entirely different, but it's still going to be awesome.
Of course it is. But you can still kind of.
I don't know. I feel like some of our ideas might be close. I feel like some of our ideas might be close, actually. Like maybe not exactly right, but really, like what is the Zelda team gonna do? They're gonna like try and logic through what are interesting ways to sort of evolve the gameplay, right? And that's really all we're doing, right? We're just kind of thinking what would be the best way to answer these problems, like what solutions will we come up with, and some of our ideas may be similar, right? Like that's because they're kind of like logical steps for where they could take the game.
Yeah, you can guess a general direction pretty easily. Like when Breath of the Wild was first announced and we didn't know anything about that game, I already had a feeling like this story is probably going to be pretty minimum because they want everything to be about that freedom. But I do hope that for Breath of the Wild they kind of like pull the brakes on that a little bit. I think there's nothing wrong with having a story with urgency. Like, a lot of people always complain about nowadays, it's kind of become a trend with open world games where people start complaining about ludonarrative dissonance or something like that. It's where you have a certain urgency, but your gameplay experience kind of contradicts it. Like in Fallout 4, you know, your son gets kidnapped at the beginning. You want to get your son back, but instead you're going out to grow a garden somewhere. You know, that should not be on your priority list, but you have the option to do it because it's open world. And I've never really minded those kinds of things. Yeah, it's disconnected from the story, but you can have a urgent story together with open like freedom. And I think with Breath of the Wild, they took it a step too far, where they removed almost all the story and made it optional, or just didn't have really that much to do with the things you were doing. Because you didn't have to do anything in Breath of the Wild. The whole game was about growing stronger and getting more equipment so you can take on Ganon. But that's it. There's no other motivation.
Nobody in that game cared that Ganon was there at all.
Which game do you think has the best
it,
story?
There was no...
Which Zelda game do you guys think has the best story?
Oh.
A lot of people
Majora's Mask or Skyward Sword?
Yeah, a lot of people say Skyward Sword, but yeah, the presentation is good, but I actually don't even think the story of Skyward Sword is that interesting. But that's just me.
It's the way they told it that was more interesting than the actual like concept on paper.
Yeah, exactly. Like the presentation was the best.
The plot twist though was Zelda at the end, and the time thing was really cool.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It probably is one of the more complicated Zelda stories we've ever had, but it came at a cost, because that game is the polar opposite of Breath of the Wild. It has one of the best and most complex stories, but it's like a linear A to B experience. You cannot do any dungeon out of order. You have to go. You're not even allowed to go to the desert right at the beginning of the game. You have to wait until like after the third dungeon, I think.
Yeah.
Like that's.
It takes away from that sense of exploration.
I think Ocarina of Time maybe has the best balance then.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
I think
Ocarina is probably one of my favorites, so I think it's. I would say, like, if we're talking best story, I'd think of Twilight Princess and Ocarina personally.
Twilight Princess was a really good
Princess, also a pretty good story.
But I guess what I'm trying to get at here is
that's kind of linear too.
What's the best way to create a very strong, compelling story, but also have a very open Zelda game? Like, how can you do both well? Because, for example, there's a lot of RPGs that are littered with cutscenes all over. It's like watching an anime or something. And sometimes it's really cool, but that's not really how you're going to handle a Zelda game, right? At least I don't think they will.
I noticed that with the Genshin Impact. I was like, are these people ever going to shut up? It's like constant talking. Like, oh my god. That's definitely not something I want to have in a Zelda game, preferably.
But, Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time are very interesting because there are these moments, right? When you accomplish a certain task, there are these major moments that sort of lead to big story beats, right? I think if the story beats are spaced out a fair bit, you can have some significant cutscenes, but they got to be spaced out, and the opening cutscene has to be very quick. Because I personally, I think they handled it perfectly. I think Breath of the Wild has the perfect beginning to any video game ever. It's very quick, and you just get out there, and exploring the world sort of tells you more about what's going on. And I think that's part of how they have to handle a story in Breath of the Wild too. It's more the story. A lot of the story has to be told through the gameplay and the characters. Which is why I was asking you guys which game you guys think has the best story. And Brandon, I think you mentioned Majora's Mask as one of them. So what's great about Majora's Mask is that the game is very compelling with its world and its atmosphere and its characters. And there's a lot of story told there, but it's not like a cutscene heavy game. It's a side quest heavy game, but the side quests are really fun and amazing, right? So with this Hyrule that's being restored, maybe this time there is more of a focus on the characters and the side quests and interesting things you can do. And this sort of tells you more about this gradual devastation that is perhaps building as Ganondorf is resurrecting, right? And that adds to the story. And besides that, every time you reach one of those major points where you beat a major dungeon or something, then you get those big story beats. And I feel like there is a balance between those big story beats and not, and not putting too many cutscenes and just having a lot of really strong characters and side quests. And you could still somehow have a very open experience and still have a really strong, compelling story. I think there is a balance there that is possible. Will Nintendo and the Zelda team accomplish it? We shall see. But I do think there's a potential balance there where they can strike it perfectly or close to perfectly.
Well, there is a way to do it. Like you gave Ocarina of Time as an example. Like every time you do certain things, something significant changes in that world at that point. Like when you're still a child, Ganondorf is basically like while you are out going and collecting you're beating the first 3 dungeons, you're collecting those stones, those spiritual stones.
Yeah.
Ganondorf is basically doing nothing. He's just hanging around. But it makes sense story-wise because he needs the portal of time to open in order for him to go into the Sacred Realm and grab the Triforce. So it makes sense that he would be waiting for you, and thus it doesn't. It's not weird that Link is just fishing, going out fishing, and in the meantime, is not doing. I think they could do some like little solutions like that, like creative solutions, narrative-wise. I think that would be key for Breath of the Wild 2. Like you beat a specific thing in the world, either it's a dungeon or you complete a specific story quest, and then something significant changes, and that's where the cutscenes happen. Again, like in Ocarina of Time, you beat the water temple, you think to yourself, oh, I'm going to check up on Kakariko Village, see what's going on over there, and all of a sudden Kakariko Village is on fire and something's going down over there.
Yeah, I think that's going to be, like, I agree with you, like, that's going to be a big part of, like, how they could accomplish that sort of thing. Because you could have, like, you still have the open freedom that Breath of the Wild typically has, but now that, let's say, hypothetically, we have 8 dungeons, you go to a dungeon, maybe there's a little bit of story about what's going on, what the dungeon is causing, what it's doing to the local area, whatever the case may be, and then you beat it, you have another cutscene that's showing what it did to the local area, and maybe that's how they can keep the game fresh too, for if they tend to reuse the map, because maybe at first it's what we know, maybe there's certain things change, maybe the water's poisonous for some reason, and you beat the dungeon and something drastically changes, and now we have like this new portion of Hyrule that is different from what we know. We could, explore it a little better.
I like that, yeah.
Yeah, I love the idea of there being chain reactions. Like, imagine, like, one of them, you fight a giant Leviathan. It's like Shadow of the Colossus-like event. You beat it, but the act of beating it actually causes a lot of damage, and it destroys, like, this whole region of Hyrule or province. And maybe it opens up something else, another cavern, right? And it just, like, creates a whole other slew of side quests to sort of help me fix my house or things like that, right? Like they could do stuff like that.
It has to be tied to because I definitely don't want them to go back to the original Zelda formula where you enter the overworld and you can already see, oh, okay, I cannot access that area. There's a thing in the way. Of course, I'm gonna need bombs to blow those rocks out of the way. And like I always that was definitely one thing about the Zelda formula that was getting tired, because every time it was the same. Like when you start up the game, half of the overworld is just inaccessible, and you can already guess what kind of item you're gonna need to actually be able to access that area. So that's not a thing that's gonna work in Breath of the Wild, especially in Breath of the Wild 2. That is, like, especially with the freedom they've already set up with the engine, being able to climb anything. There's no real boundaries anymore. So, but I do want them to go back to it. I think there is a certain satisfaction to being able to find something, but not being able to solve or access it right away. So you find a cavern, but there's like a keyhole in that cavern, and you don't know what it's gonna be, how you get in at that point. until like 3 dungeons later you finally find something, or during a side quest you find something, and being able to remember like, oh yeah, that door that I found, that secret door, doesn't have to contain like a plot crucial element, but I do like the idea of finding things and not being able to access them right away. And your idea actually tied into that as well a little bit. You could restrict those things to specific areas of the map. So say you have 8 dungeons, you have one in Hebra, one in Gerudo, one in Farron, just as an example. You could still have that progression item thing in that area, but it doesn't prevent you from going. You're not going to get items where you cannot go to a specific dungeon until you've beaten another one, because then you go back to dungeon order again, and now we're back to square one. So I think you should tie those little things, those progression items, to smaller things and maybe only contain to a specific province or area, and find a balance there.
I like Shifty's idea of it being like you do something and it changes a specific part in the environment. Like perhaps there's a part the first time you go into it, it's like a boggy, like muddy area, and then you defeat the dungeon, all of a sudden that bog, that mud water turns into clear water, and you can dive down there and explore, and there's different things for you to find that weren't there before, but in a natural, not like I found this item and now I can blow up this really obvious crack in the wall and find it's like the entire environment naturally changes in a way that you didn't really expect, and that feels very natural and systemic.
Like a part of a lake drains, and there's like all of a sudden it turns out there's a underwater sunken ship down there or something.
Ooh.
Yeah, there could be something like that, and that could even also tie into side quests. Like that doesn't even need to be, something that's tied to major dungeons. Like I don't know if you guys ever played. There's another game that I played. It was called Prey. Prey on the. It's like a modern just game. Okay. But Prey had this certain moment that I would love to see in Zelda, where they just kind of mention a character. This character has nothing to do with the main campaign or anything like that. But if you've heard that name before and you happen to recognize it, you might be able to go find that person and go get an item that you need, or maybe you just want. So maybe there's a chest in someone's house that's locked for some reason, and you need a key, but you know the name of the person who lives in that house, and you know where you might be able to find them. So maybe you could go get the key yourself. It's little things like that where a little brain power is needed instead of just being able to just walk in the house, grab everything in the house, and leave.
Yeah. Those little cognitive decisions that you can make. I think Resident Evil 8 even did it recently. Like you have a couple of houses in the village that are completely optional. You don't have to go in there, but you try the door and you're like, the door has like a guitar shape on it. And then hours later into the game, you find a guitar-shaped key all of a sudden. And being able to remember that and be like, oh yeah, that house I couldn't enter with the guitar on the front door. That's probably gonna. I want stuff like that to be in Zelda again, because Breath of the Wild didn't have that. There was literally nothing preventing you from solving everything and being able to access everything right away. At the very most, you ran out of arrows in a shrine where you were supposed to use arrows, but that was rare.
Yeah. Something I would like is, because my favorite side quests in Breath of the Wild, the side quests aren't very good, but for the most part, but Tarrytown, the side quest with that, I thought was amazing, and I would like it if, since they're rebuilding Hyrule, if there was more side quests like that, but for like every town. And as you upgrade buildings, new people would move in, and they would give you different rewards, maybe a key where you couldn't access something before, and you're like, oh crap, this dude who moved in gave me this reward, and now I can go over here where I found this other thing that I couldn't interact with before, and now I can. So that might be a good tool to give you those different items.
Yeah, I love it. Tarrytown was amazing.
Yeah, Tarrytown was great. I
think in general, like things like Tarrytown even tied the island. That's the kind of stuff Breath of the Wild needed more of.
Yeah.
Like maybe there could have been a quest to kind of tell you more about the history of like the Guardian of the Mountain, right? Like or like for example, different things. Like I really liked the Nadra sort of quest, right, where you just chance upon, you don't have to like you just chance upon a mountain and you see a giant dragon. That was my first dragon. Like I didn't know what was gonna happen. That
was mine too.
I climb up this snowy mountain and I just see this giant beast and I'm like, oh my god, I'm dead. And
that's
you
like
save
the
it.
One of the coolest things that can happen in that game.
Yeah. I want more moments like that for sure. But
yeah,
let's I'm gonna now ask you guys to start putting questions in the chat. We'll kind of do a little bit of Q&A before we close things out. If there's anything you guys want to bring up, it doesn't have to be in the chat. Feel free to just put it out there.
I'm gonna grab myself some water because my throat is disappearing.
Gotcha.
The only thing I could think of that I would want to add that we haven't really talked about in detail is something that I've wanted since, I want to say since maybe a year after Breath of the Wild came out. Just a way to repair your equipment. That's all.
Yes.
Because don't get me wrong, I know a lot of people hate the weapon durability system. I actually really love the system. I think the only thing they need to add is a way to repair them if you want to repair them. A good example I like to bring up is I don't know if you guys ever played the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion.
I did.
Or maybe even like past Elder Scrolls games. There was just a way you can buy like repair hammers and then use them on an item, and then it just like increases the durability on that item, or just pay a blacksmith to do it for you.
Yeah.
Something like that.
One of the biggest things about Zelda that isn't always great is its economy system. Like a lot of times rupees just don't feel useful. And I would love it if they just add more things to actually spend your rupees on. Like a blacksmith, where you could bring materials and rupees and repair weapons or even upgrade weapons. Also, another thing about Breath of the Wild's weapon system is you can just kind of happen upon really powerful weapons pretty easily and then just stock up. Like, you just have like 5 great flame swords or whatever in your inventory. I would like it if instead of just giving you a whole weapon, it just gave you like parts for weapons. And as you scrounged and you found more parts, then you took to the blacksmith. Maybe you even have to like unlock blueprints or find blueprints for these weapons, for these ultra powerful weapons. And then you can take it to the blacksmith and then get those weapons made for you. Yeah. Just more reason to actually have rupees is always nice in a Zelda game, because I feel like there's never been a Zelda game that actually has a really good economy. There's been some that are better than others, but I feel like the economy in Zelda is kind of usually weak.
Skyward Sword wasn't that bad.
No, Skyward Sword was probably one of the better ones.
Yeah.
I think going to a blacksmith to repair items could also like be a good use for the minerals that we see all over the map.
Yeah.
Other than
because you just sell them for money.
Yeah.
So don't super need.
Right. So either sell them for money or you make them more useful in like the repair system.
It could be both, right? Like you could opt to sell them for money, or occasionally specific ones could work for certain things. So for example, like maybe you want to create a fire blade. Maybe you need to get a ruby that has like a fire essence, and you need that in order to forge a fire sword,
and then that way it would. Sword. True, yeah, and then in that sense, it would also make it so that the minerals, like people won't just stock up on a bunch of these minerals and just sell them on bulk. They might have to think about which ones they're getting rid of and which ones they need, because you're not going to be able to repair your weapons with only money. You're going to need money and maybe limes, like those stones or whatever it is called, like rubies or topaz or whatever it is.
Gives you more reason to actually explore, and they can put like rare minerals around that you like. Just more things, because a lot of the exploration Breath of the Wild just kind of dumbs down to finding shrines and finding Korok seeds, and then just like some materials you need sometimes. It would be nice if there were more things to find.
But they made it feel like more of an organic world where there's just different types of things all throughout, right?
Yeah.
But let me check on the chat here. So because some people start pointing things out. Shout out to the Yellow Kazoo. How are you doing? Yellow Kazoo loves the Breath of the Wild side quests. I like some of them. Others they're fun. There's nothing that's like terrible from what I remember, but I would like them to go even further.
There's not a lot of them.
Super Chris. Thank you for modding as always. Supercrest asks, what are your expectations for this year's E3? So, I talk about this on my different videos, and we'll probably have like a final predictions podcast right before. But I did my early E3 predictions like 2 or 3 months ago. My opinion hasn't changed that much, just for the record. But basically, my expectations, like hard expectations, I expect to see Breath of the Wild 2. I think it's likely we'll get a DLC, a trailer for the Wave 1 of Age of Calamity. I think we will get an update trailer or a small little short trailer for Pokemon. But there's gonna be a Pokemon Presents like right before E3 where we'll get most of the details. They'll just kind of like acknowledge Pokemon's existence during the E3 Direct. I think there's gonna be an E3 Direct, in case that wasn't clear. I think there's gonna be a new Metroid announced. I am not 100% convinced, but I think there's a high likelihood that we're gonna get a Fortnite announcement with Samus in it in conjunction with the new side-scrolling Metroid game. I don't think Prime 4 is going to be shown off. If it is, I'll be so happy. I'll be screaming and crying tears of joy. But I think what they'll do is they'll just say, hey, development's going really well. Check out this other awesome Metroid game instead. So that's kind of like the Metroid stuff. I think this Donkey Kong thing is real. Now, the issue is that I think there's a chance we don't see it at E3. I think we maybe wait a little bit longer. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the Donkey Kong stuff we find out is real in just a few weeks. Just for the record, if it's not there, it doesn't mean it's not real. It just means Intel hasn't shown it off yet. But I do think it's real, and we'll see that at E3 probably. Going beyond that, those are like my expectations. Like if I don't, that's what I expect to see. I also expect to see a sequel to Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle. By the way, that's what I believe we'll see at E3 probably. And then going beyond that, there's a good chance we see what Monolith Soft has been working on, but we may have to wait a little bit longer. There's a good chance we see Bayonetta 3, but we may have to wait a little bit longer. Bayonetta 3 I feel like is pretty likely, but I'm not like 100% or 90, maybe like 60. Going beyond that, No More Heroes 3 will be shown off to some extent. Shin Megami Tensei 5 I think will be at E3 unless it's been delayed, because it's coming out this year. Besides that, I think there's going to be at least one new Sonic game shown off, or Sonic Remaster. Those are my expectations, I would say, pretty much. Like, we could maybe see maybe a new Mario Party or something like that. But that's pretty much it. Oh, one more thing. This is a big one. We potentially could see something from whatever the Arns Mario Kart team has been working on. Maybe a new Mario Kart, maybe something else really cool. Don't know what it is, but there's a chance we see that at E3 as well. Those are my expectations.
That's a nice list.
It's gonna be a good time.
Yeah.
I think most of this, pretty much all of that's pretty reasonable and lines up with a lot of things we've been hearing, so it's not too crazy.
One more thing. We're gonna see Earthbound 64. And it's gonna be a full 3D open Earthbound game, and it's gonna be amazing. You heard it here first. Watch that be real.
God, that would be insane.
J Spike added me. Have you seen the Breath of the Wild original concept art? There are a ton of arts of Link having a green hand that morphs into different items, almost like the Green Lantern's ring. Nintendo's notorious for reusing cut assets in sequels. Yeah, I mean, we're in agreement. We touched on it before. Shifty, you were talking about how like maybe that could be the replacement for like the runes. Yeah, I think there's a really good chance that sequel trailer has the green hand consuming Link. I think they are going to sort of play with that idea. I definitely think there's going to be something. There is going to be a replacement for the runes, and maybe we don't get like the actual hook shot. Maybe we don't get like the actual Dominion Rod, but what happens is as you explore these ancient ruins of Hyrule, the Green Hand has like a history of the different heroes, and it remembers some of the things they did, and it recreates it once it sort of explores this area. It's like, oh, this once past hero used this hook shot in this way. Let me recreate it for you, and then you get like a magical version of the hook shot. Like maybe they could do something like that. I could see that something like that happening.
Yeah, and I think that would also tie into, because obviously every Zelda game, Link has to start from scratch. Like he collected all those hearts in the last game. They have to somehow justify him starting with 3 hearts again, probably, or maybe 4, or like 6, like in Skyward Sword, because they cannot let you start off with 20 hearts, you know. And since it's a green hand, it could function a little bit like a curse, you know. It's something that afflicts him.
It weakens you at first, but you sort of acclimate to it over time.
Yeah, exactly. Because we've already seen sort of a hint of that in Breath of the Wild with the DLC, where you pick up that the one-hit obliterator, I think it's called.
Yeah, that one's really cool.
And it drains all of his heart. So if it's like something spiritual, something that afflicts him, that could justify him starting from scratch again, without being just like, oh, Link all of a sudden has 3 hearts again. We don't know why, but
it's just this is just the timeline where they just went immediately and beat him without any preparation. Oh, look at that.
Yeah, exactly. And it could also tie into not being able to use the Master Sword, since it's his sword hand that gets afflicted. It's his right hand, and he is right-handed in that game too. Which maybe the Master Sword will reject him because of the spirit that dwells in his hand. So he's not able to use the Master Sword, because, you know, the Master Sword kind of defeats the whole... Once you have the Master Sword, you don't really have a reason to use many of the other weapons. It's one of the strongest one-handed swords in the game. Which we also, by the way, powered up in the DLC, so that it's permanently doing 60 damage after you complete the Trial of the Sword. So yeah, that could also work in that way.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because, like, we know that, well, they've told us that a lot of Breath of the Wild 2 is sort of born from the DLC ideas for Breath of the Wild, right? Like, maybe that one-hit obliterator idea, that was perhaps a hint towards what's coming. Like, maybe we should take a second look at the Champion's Ballad, because maybe there's more hints towards the sequel in there, you know? Maybe that they had this idea for the green hand, and then they were like, oh, let's play around with this idea and put the one-hit obliterator just to test it out, and then in the sequel that there's kind of more of that. That'd be really interesting to see. And then the hand consumes Link's right hand, right? So that's the hand he uses to use the Master Sword, right? So you know, he might have to use his left hand for fighting with blades and stuff, which would be cool, because that's what most Links used to use, right? So it might be kind of like going back to that. And what would make that more interesting is I have this personal theory that because Ganondorf is going to be in this game, there's going to be a little bit more of an emphasis on the Triforce of power, courage, and wisdom, and each character sort of has their own story and adventure throughout the sequel that's about them sort of refining that. Like, for Zelda, it's about gaining her powers back, establishing a greater wisdom, and by the end of the game, she gets her Triforce of Wisdom. Ganondorf is resurrecting, and the power, you know, Triforce of Power, he's just building up his power. And then for Link, it's about sort of like, I guess, finding his spiritual roots with the fellow heroes, right? Like, maybe to my point, how with the green hand, it sort of remembers the different items heroes used, but then also, like you were saying, like, you know, maybe it forces him to use his weapons differently, and the whole left hand thing sort of relating him more to past heroes, you know? And maybe there's something to that idea. It's not a possibility.
Either that, or maybe the hand is able to replicate certain abilities from enemies you defeated, like boss. You take you go full Mega Man style in that regard. You defeat a specific boss, you take on their powers, which would be a very cool concept as well. What
if like one of the power-ups is you learn how to replicate the Guardian laser?
Well, yeah, for instance, we see
but it's like you have a blast powered up and you're just like, boom, there's a lot of recoil, but whatever's there is just like wrecked.
Yeah. I think Darksiders 2 also did something similar. Like, you have this glowing hand, and you gain all kinds of abilities with that. You can use it even has like a grappling hook type of I think it's called the death grip in that game. Mm-hmm. Like, you defeat or you absorb a certain essence, and then you're allowed to use that ability, and all those abilities are yeah, well, they're stored inside that hand in a sense, and I see that working very well. We even see concept art of that, where Link is holding like a broken Master Sword in his left hand, and his other hand is like some sort of weird Guardian laser thing, and, you know, and all the other stuff where you can see him shooting
Yeah.
a grappling hook type of deal from his hand. One is his hand is transformed into a bow and arrow. Like all that stuff could work.
It adds up. There's all these different puzzle pieces here. Like they're logically fitting, right? So maybe there's something to these ideas, and we'll see them really soon.
Yeah.
iSonic added me here. There are rumors of a Sonic collection on the same retailer that leaked Sonic Colors Ultimate. Could this mean something? Your thoughts? I mean, I think there's a good chance we see Sonic something for sure. Whether it's a Sonic Colors Remaster, Sonic Collection, a brand new 3D Sonic, or some combination of that. I don't think it's not like a lofty prediction to say that a new Sonic game is going to get announced this year. Like there's supposedly Sonic anniversary plans, there's a new Sonic movie coming out. They may want to do some cross promotion with that. So I think timing wise, to expect maybe a Sonic announcement sometime this year, potentially at E3, it makes a lot of sense. And just from like a Nintendo perspective, if you look at previous Nintendo systems, even the Wii U had an exclusive ground-up Sonic game made for it. Have we gotten any ground-up Sonic games made for Switch yet? No. And yet it's like one of the most wildly popular Nintendo systems yet. So it wouldn't surprise me if at some point in the Switch's life cycle we see an exclusive Sonic made for it. I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen one yet, actually. So, I don't know if we'll get specifically a Sonic collection, but I do think there are some Sonic plans for sure. I've been thinking maybe at least a Sonic Colors remaster. Let's see here. J Spike added me. Interesting that you mentioned the left hand. Ganondorf has only ever been defeated by a left-handed Link. Maybe he does go back to being a lefty and has to relearn the sword as a lefty. I mean, also, Breath of the Wild Link's the only right-handed Link, save for Twilight Princess, where he does defeat Ganondorf. Because Twilight
Skyward
Princess
Sword.
What? Oh no, Skyward Sword's right-handed Link too. You're right, and he defeats
Yes.
Demise.
Twilight Princess is only a right-handed Link in the Wii version, right?
Right. So I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, I wouldn't make
Isn't
make
really
too much of the hand
The
thing. with
canon
that.
version, I'd say.
Yeah,
If
I think
anything,
Link,
the GameCube version's more canon.
I don't expect Link's dominant hand having a lot of. I think some people read a little bit too deep into that. I think it's more like for Skyward Sword, it was simply because more people are right-handed, so they made him right-handed in that game. The same
Yeah.
goes for the Wii version of Twilight Princess.
But what's the functional reason in Breath of the Wild?
That is the question.
Is it just
I
because
don't know.
the previous one was already right-handed they decided to make that transition? Like the Link in Breath of the Wild is actually perhaps the most unique Link, right? Because we actually get lore telling us why he's silent. He wasn't always silent, right? Like they explain why. He took a vow of silence because of all the pride and pressure of being a knight, right? Like the knight. Don, feel free to correct me because I know you know more about the Zelda lore than I do. But yeah, so there's that in mind. But then he is mysteriously right-handed, and he has this whole history that we learn about before the events of the game. Like there's a lot more we know about this Link than any other Link throughout the history of Zelda. And strangely, he's right-handed for no apparent functional reason. The only argument I feel like you can make is just that because they transitioned to right-handed Link in Skyward Sword, and he was already half right-handed because of the Wii version for Twilight Princess, maybe they just decided just to stick with right-handed because of that. But otherwise, I can't think of a functional reason why they decided to go with right-handed versus left.
I don't know. I've always thought it was just because every Link is a different person. It's a different new incarnation of the hero, and at some point they kind of realize, he doesn't have to be left-handed all the time. And there's actually an interesting thing about Breath of the Wild Link. I think even though he uses a sword in his right hand, he draws his bow as a left-handed person. which
Huh.
is kind of weird.
I never realized that.
If I, yeah, don't quote me on that because I'm not 100% sure, but remember someone mentioning that, like, no archer who is right-handed would shoot his bow like that. So something like that.
He's ambidextrous because he's Link.
Yeah. But I think certain things are just not as deep as some people think they might, like in terms of meaning, you know, just like Zelda having short hair. People have been speculating that to death at this point, and I'm like, well, maybe they just wanted her to look different in this new installment, you know, give her a little bit of a makeover. Because a lot of people use the argument, oh, she has short hair because she's gonna be playable. It's like, well, she's playable in Age of Calamity. She has long hair there. I'm pretty sure the hair is not going to be much of a limitation, to be honest.
I hear you.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I don't really think they pay too much mind on, like, you know, things like that being like you know, there has to be a reason behind the hair. There has to be a reason behind being left-handed, right-handed.
So I'll give a
Maybe
little
it
bit of
just
pushback.
fit in there breaking the standard formula kind of thing. They're just like, you know what? He's usually left-handed. He's gonna be right-handed this time.
It could just
Yeah.
be just because it's on a whim. And Zelda's hair could be a choice simply based off on a whim, a design choice on a whim. But I don't think it's crazy to at least consider that maybe they wanted to give Zelda a little bit more of a sporty look because she will be doing more adventuring in the game, which is why they went with a shorter hair look, to go for more of that sporty like design. Because that is sometimes why like artists do make certain design choices, like, oh, you know, this character's gonna be doing this in the game, so I felt like maybe they should have this to them, right? So I don't think that's a crazy like idea, but at the same time I also agree it doesn't mean for sure that because she has shorter hair that means she's playable, right? Like that's a leap. It's a possibility, but it's only one of a few different possibilities.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I agree. Like I know the Conrad from Commonwealth Realm, he's very obsessed with Zelda's shorter hairstyle. He mentioned it in almost every theory he does nowadays. I'm like, dude, you don't have to keep reiterating this fact. It might not mean anything.
maybe.
Then again, maybe nothing really. Like that whole Breath of the Wild 2 trailer could just as well be just a short cutscene, and it doesn't mean anything for the
Right.
final game.
Yeah, what if that cutscene's like not even like in the game? Like, what if the story just takes an entirely different, like goes in an entirely different direction, right?
Yeah, I mean, look at Twilight Princess, the original trailer. Like half of the stuff you saw in that game didn't even make it into the game.
Yeah,
Like, there's a lot of bosses that you see that didn't make it
the
in.
chasing spider.
The chasing spider, indeed. Like Link walking around the forest with a lantern and stuff.
And there's
that,
a wood
that was all not.
golem. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would have. Yeah, it was weird because I remember it was a different. It was almost like a different Zelda game that we never got to play, which is
Yeah.
kind of exciting to think about. So yeah, I don't know.
It does.
It's gonna be
I don't
interesting
think-
to see what we get for the sequel.
I don't think it's going to be as extreme with this game. It looks at least partially like they've already made up like they already chose a direction to go in with the story.
Yeah,
But who knows?
Rillaru the Sailor. The answer to what's my cat's name? His name is Onyx. My brother actually named him. He meant to name him after the Pokemon, but he didn't realize the Pokemon's name was different from the stone name. So he's actually named after the stone accidentally. So, yeah.
Oh,
Man, he's just,
interesting.
yeah. Considering here, is there any more interesting questions? There's probably a few that I missed. Onyx, get out of the way. Yes, we talked about you, but you can move now. Go that way. The Yellow Kazoo. Why can't we get Loftwing back? Right? We were talking about it earlier. Bring back the Loftwings. It can happen. It doesn't matter if they're extinct. Sometimes in real life, scientists find animals that we thought were extinct, and then they're not actually extinct. Maybe they're just really rare. So bring them back. It'll be fine.
Yeah, there's no reason why they cannot be still alive. We see them flying away at the end of Skyward Sword. And then you can say, well, why weren't they in Ocarina of Time since it takes place at the beginning of the timeline? Well, those games were made before Skyward Sword. Loftwing were not conceptualized yet.
Yeah.
It's the only reason.
And, you know, the canon reason could just be that they were really rare and they just did not interact with people for many years. Just that
We're
simple, right?
in Hyrule at the time. It's not like Hyrule's the only place. It's like the globe, and there's Hyrule, and it's just like ocean around. Like there's other places.
The other thing
they
is
flew
that
south.
Go on.
I said I was just joking. I said they flew south for the winter. And then never came back.
Very long winter. I mean, the other thing is that they were in the sky. They were sky creatures, right? Like maybe most Zelda games don't really go that far into the sky, so you don't see them. And it's just that simple. That they're sky creatures, and Skyloft is not something we've explored besides Skyward Sword. But in Breath of the Wild 2, with potentially more sky exploration, maybe we will explore Skyloft again, or whatever's there, high up there now.
Well, the setup is already there because we find Loftwing statues at the Forgotten Temple. There's even a girl in Kakariko Village who says something along the line like, I used to hear people rode birds around in the sky. I would like to do that too someday.
What if that's a tease?
Yeah.
It's probably more of just, you know, a reminder of a previous game, but It would be a nice little tease. I do know the Pokemon games, they do things like that, where there are characters like, oh, what if there was this Pokemon that had a horn that was on fire, and then the next game, the starter Pokemon is a Pokemon with a horn that's on fire. Like, they do that. Just checking with the chat here. iSonic Atomy, is Wind Waker HD possibly 60 frames per second? The game can be and look way more fluid. I mean, it's definitely possible. We were just theorizing earlier in the discussion that they might not, because it's already been remastered and they might do like a double pack with Twilight Princess, so they may not feel the need to do it. While Skyward Sword is its own thing, so maybe they felt like there were other things they need to do for Skyward Sword to make it more of a relevant, valuable, you know, actual proposition for people to buy for $60. So it's possible, but I'm not convinced it'll be 60 frames per second. Although I'll tell you, yeah, it would be a lot of work. I'll tell you though, I do like Brandon's thinking. We've talked about this before. Like maybe Nintendo wants to move in the direction of making Zelda 60 frames per second moving forward. Like probably the base Switch will not be able to run Breath of the Wild 2 at 60 frames per second. That seems probably almost impossible. But what if on a Switch Pro there is a 60 FPS mode for Breath of the Wild 2? You know, and then moving forward as hardware improves, we start seeing open world 60 frames per second games. That'd be incredible. So, you know, maybe Nintendo at least wants to move in that direction for the Zelda series. I'm just not sure if they'll go through the effort for Wind Waker HD, but we'll see. So this is a question, I think, well, this will be the last question for the night. And this kind of circles back to what we were talking about earlier. And so we'll just kind of maybe try and put a nice little bow on this. So J Spike asks, when do you guys expect Breath of the Wild 2's release window to be? I hope end of the year, but seems like Q1 2022 might be more realistic, but then I don't know what Nintendo Christmas season game would be. So again, we talked about this earlier. We kind of already put our thoughts out there. I guess, you know, I'm still predicting holiday 2021. I still think it's possible. From what I've heard, it's still possible. I believe Nintendo wants Breath of the Wild 2 out for the holiday. It'd be the ideal game for the 35th anniversary to get a high-profile AAA game out there. It'd be great to have a game like that out there, especially with Sony and Microsoft coming out with their big high-profile games like Horizon and Halo. So it would be nice if Nintendo could do that. But, you know, they could have other things in store instead. Entirely possible. I do feel like right now what we're seeing Nintendo put out different pieces of Zelda information that conceivably they could have talked about at E3. Like, they could have given us the whole Zelda Amiibo information, Skyward Sword Amiibo at E3. They didn't have to do that now. I do feel like they're getting this Zelda news out now. They're talking about Mario Golf now with the overview trailer. And, well, they have to cover Miitopia because it's coming out this month. But they're doing all these things right now, getting all of the February Direct announcement stuff out of the way because they're preparing themselves for the next deluge of information, and I think that's a lot of that's going to be focused on Breath of the Wild too. And to Don's point from earlier, if it is like, you know, like a full reveal of this game, not just like another teaser, that does support the idea that they are around the corner of release, right? And I mean, based off what AJ Numa said, like, if we go back to the Age of Calamity reveal, he came out and he said, hey, look, we got this game, Breath of the Wild development's going well, but you're gonna have to wait a little bit longer. And then we got that again at the February Direct, but he said that, hey, you're gonna get details about this game hopefully later this year. That all seems to be pointing towards like a big sort of E3 reveal. I'm assuming an E3 reveal, there's a rumor that maybe they'll give us a trailer, but then they'll say, hey, it's going to be at another event, right? Which I would be kind of annoying if they keep on saying, hey, look, it's going to be another event, it's going to be another event.
Ridiculous.
I do think that there's a good chance it does come out holiday 2020, and I could be wrong, so be prepared for it to not come out. But because Nintendo is forecasting at least 25.5 million pieces of Switch hardware, to me that suggests Nintendo's going to get a lot of hardware. They're going to have content to support that, perhaps a revision to support that. And if this Switch Pro and Breath of the Wild 2 come out for March, yeah, it'll help. But if it comes out for the holiday, it'll help a lot more. And I feel like 25.5 million is kind of a lofty goal. Yes, we got like, what, 28 point something last year, but that was a COVID year. It was a record year. Onyx, you're moving everything. Stop it. So, you know, I feel like Nintendo has some big plans in store, which, you know, it gives me hope for the sequel coming out this year. But again, you know, COVID was a thing that could have impacted things. Maybe they're not ready. But at the same time, because Legends Arceus is due out early 2022, I don't think it's coming out early 2022. So, that's what I sort of think.
I actually forgot to mention that before about the release window, but I also think that they don't want to make the same mistake that they did with Breath of the Wild's announcement and release.
Mm-hmm.
I think Breath of the Wild, I think it's definitely not impossible to think that whenever we will see Breath of the Wild 2, it will already be so far in development, much further than we anticipated it would be. And that they just... Because he didn't even say, maybe you'll see more this year. He said, we will see more about the game this year. And I think they could have... You're not going to tell me that in the 2 years since that first reveal trailer, they couldn't have shown anything about the game. Slap together another little teaser, or you know, have some small gameplay trailer of even if it's only 30 seconds, you know. But I think they purposely didn't do that because they kind of learned from the mistake they made with Breath of the Wild, because they started showing that game like much more sporadically. Like you had the first reveal, then you already had the first gameplay demonstration in like only a half year later during the Game Awards. And the game wasn't even really fully... They didn't even know what this game was going to be still. Like, they didn't have a Sheikah Slate idea at that point in time yet. And they said, it's going to release in 2015, guys. Like, we're going to make this. And that was at the end of 2014. And then it just got delayed for 2 more years after that because they kept changing the game. They kept changing they added the Sheikah Slate, and it just became more and more ambitious, which ended up making the game release 2 years later than they were originally planning to. And I don't think they want to make that same mistake for Breath of the Wild 2. I think that this time they're like, when we show the game, we want it to be already there. It's no longer going to be... We're not going to make that mistake again where we're showing it and we're promising people 2020, guys, and then it ends up releasing in 2022.
So, like, if it comes out, let's say it does come out March 2022, which, again, I'm skeptical of because Legends Arceus is slated for early 2022, but maybe early 2022 means, like, May, right? And Breath of the Wild 2 still comes out in March, right? Which I'm skeptical of because even if it comes out in March, Legends Arceus, that would already be the longest announcement to release window for a Game Freak Pokemon game ever. So if it's May, it's even longer. So I'm skeptical. They do their things annually. They want to get things done in time for the fiscal year. So I really am skeptical that Legends Arceus comes out past the fiscal year, but we'll see. But I guess the point I wanted to make though is that because to your point, they showed us actual footage of Breath of the Wild back in 2014, right? At that time it was just Zelda U, right?
Yeah. Correct.
Like it was when they did the whole green screen thing where Anuma was like, hey, check this out, nice, right? And it shows like Link with the bow, and that was at E3 2014. The game ends up coming out March 2017, but I feel like it's worth noting that if the Switch was not a thing, I'm pretty sure the game was going to come out holiday 2016. So initially it was probably meant to be. It could have been a 2.5 year sort of thing, right? But they extended it 4 more years. But either way, so
well, they changed the release date like 3 times.
Yeah,
first it was 2015,
2016, 2017. Right.
Yeah, because the Twilight Princess teaser said 2016. I remember that.
Yeah.
But but anyway, 2014 to March 2017. So from summer 2014 to early 2017, right? Even though we know the development started around like the end of 2017, early 2018, right around there, they revealed the game like again, summer 2019, similar to the E3 2014, right? So 2 years later, summer 2021, that's where we're at now. But then 9 months after that, March 2022 would be the exact same time frame between like reveal and release. And because it's a sequel, that is a weird sort of situation. You think it'd be sooner than that, right?
Yeah, well, the game will probably be bigger than we were expecting to. I think they themselves realize, like, if we're gonna revisit this world, we have to add some significant new things. It's gonna be Breath of the Wild 2. It's gonna be the sequel to the best-selling Zelda game ever. We better make sure we don't screw this up. And like what I said before, was a little bit of a long-winded ramble. But all I'm trying to say is that it's definitely not impossible to think that once we see the game supposedly at E3, it's going to be way bigger and we're going to see much more than we thought we would be able to see. And then the release date could actually potentially follow way sooner after than we think. Like holiday 2021 is still, because of that, it's still on the table for me. If E3, if it ends up that at E3 they don't show like much, just another trailer with some gameplay, then yeah, it's definitely not going to be 2021. That's just not possible, because they also have to do marketing, and they might want to demo the game at some point.
Yeah, I just did a fact check to correct, because I saw that LP said it isn't the longest Game Freak to release. Diamond and Pearl got delayed by a year. I did a quick Google search to confirm that. Yes, Diamond and Pearl was announced 2004 and it launched 2006. So that is an exception. But in general, the intent with Pokemon games, especially because that was a long time ago. We're in 2021 already. Every time a Pokemon game is announced, it comes out soon after. So I feel like my point still holds. The intent is for Legends Arceus not to take that long to come out, right? But we'll see.
Do you think Switch Pro will have any impact on that?
I mean, I think that Breath of the Wild 2 and Switch Pro are probably going to be releasing together, unless there's an issue, unless some sort of development hookup with one or the other comes up. They're going to come out together, like at least in the same month.
Well, that's why I was asking that, because of Arceus, because I gotta be honest, man, I don't really like how it looks right now.
I don't see Legends Arceus. The thing is, I don't really look at Legends Arceus as like a graphical showcase for the Switch at all. And I don't think improving the resolution and adding more, like reducing pop-in or what have you, and frame, like even if you improve everything across the board, Legends Arceus is not going to be a graphical showcase for the Switch. So if Legends Arceus ends up being the launch title for a 4K capable Switch, I think that's just going to be a bad decision. Not saying it can't support it, but that's not the kind of game you use to showcase a 4K system. You're going to use something like Breath of the Wild or Metroid Prime. Like you're not going to do a Game Freak game.
I just kind of want the game to just run smoothly, if anything.
Yeah,
I could
no,
care
I think
less.
it'll look and run better on the system. I just don't think it's going to be like the premier launch game to come out alongside the system.
Yeah, I get you. I mean, I agree with you on that end. I just think my main priority with the game, from what I've seen, is that, like, okay, it's not the prettiest game I've ever seen, but there was some animations in that trailer that look kind of choppy.
Yeah, for sure.
I
And
think the game's just not been polished yet. I think it's
it's
probably an earlier build as well.
yeah, there's that.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about that earlier about Skyward Sword HD. Like, we shouldn't jump to conclusions. Obviously, I just hope that this is not what the game is gonna look like, because I think it didn't look that great as of right now. It looked like an alpha build.
Well, here's an interesting example. So when Sword and Shield was revealed, they didn't tell us about roaming Pokemon. They didn't tell us about wild areas. They just made it look like Sun and Moon. They made it look like Sun and Moon HD. That's how they made it look.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the largest component of the game was the wild area with the roaming Pokemon, and that wasn't shown off until months later. So it just kind of goes to show you that what they show off isn't necessarily indicative of what the final product will be. And there's actually a history of us seeing Nintendo games a year out from release, and people were like, oh man, the game seems a little rough around the edges, and then the argument is, oh, it's still early on, by the time the game comes out, it's gonna look a lot better. When people saying that about Mario Odyssey, and then once the game came out, 60 frames per second, it looked pretty darn good. It's one of the best looking Switch games. Like, it's kind of a common thing.
There's a lot of early
Nintendo
Switch games that had a much lower resolution when they were first shown, like Splatoon
Mhm.
2 was 720p and ended up being a dynamic 1080p. You mentioned Mario Odyssey, that was also a 720p game that ended up being a 900p game. I think even Breath of the Wild, that didn't show off 900p resolution at first, even when they were talking about the Switch version.
Yeah, that the first proper trailer was definitely 720p. Even the cutscenes in the game are still 720p, by the way, if you look up the original video files.
Yeah.
They were all rendered at 720p. That's why it looks a little bit more blurry than the actual game, because it's upscaled. So
It just kind of looks like the dynamic resolutions at a low point.
yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, we'll just have to wait and see.
We will have to wait and see. There's a number of things you guys are talking about in the chat, but I think we're gonna bring the podcast to a close so we don't hit the 4-hour mark. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for listening and watching. If you could leave a like, that'd be appreciated. Maybe share the podcast, or just subscribe and watch my videos. Any of that stuff would be appreciated. But more importantly, make sure to check out everyone else that's been in this discussion. All of their channels are linked in the description below. Check out Shifty, IamShifty. Check out Don, MonsterMaze. Check out Brandon, WhataboutNodnard. They are all linked in the description below. So, do you guys have any closing thoughts?
Sorry for my long rant about the Amiibo.
No, that's fine.
No, I'm not sorry, but I did go on a bit long.
That's what
I'm just
podcasts
hyped
are
for
for.
E3,
just
man.
I'm
long
not
talk.
used to giving strong opinions. Usually I just talk about some insignificant thing in the Zelda lore.
It's significant to Zelda fans.
Yeah, that's true. But this is probably the first time I've actually engaged in a sort of debate.
A semi-controversial topic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Amiibo looks pretty. That's my opinion.
I want to get it.
That's all it boils down to at the end of the day.
Yeah,
Is it pretty? Cool. I want to buy it.
there you go.
Yeah. If you're a
Yeah.
collector of that kind of stuff.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
I love
Exactly.
Yeah.
collecting things.
I might buy it just for the sheer chance that it will play a significant role in Breath of the Wild 2.
But
You've
you don't have to
inspired
buy it
me.
yet. You could wait till E3. If nothing comes up, then Probably.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one way
That's
to do it.
true.
Otherwise, Andres made a sale.
Well, I do have to be honest. That was something that never came up in my mind, where I was like, oh, maybe the the Loftwing thing has some implications in Breath of the Wild 2, because it is the latest amiibo to release, and it's a Zelda amiibo too, like the Wolf Link amiibo.
I'd be surprised if there wasn't, like, considering how much amiibo functionality Breath of the Wild 1 had, why wouldn't Breath of the Wild 2 have it? Unless they're going away from amiibos, but considering they just pushed out a new one, maybe I think the answer is no, right? Like they are still doing amiibos. So
oh yeah, yeah. Breath of the Wild had a lot of amiibo functionality for sure.
Yeah. Actually, it's gonna be interesting to see what amiibos they make for Breath of the Wild 2 now. I have no idea, because there's gotta be like a Ganondorf amiibo, like a new Ganondorf amiibo. That has to happen. I could easily see them making a new, like, short hair Zelda amiibo, right? And maybe there's like a glowy green hand Link amiibo as well.
Mummy Ganondorf amiibo.
Yeah, Mummy Ganondorf amiibo. So, look forward to amiibo announcements at E3 2021. You heard it here first. Maybe. But anyways, guys, thanks so much for watching. That's it for now. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
See ya.
Cool.